Hey there, tonight we're uncovering the strange rituals of the Minoan priests. What you're about to discover might surprise you, as the labyrinthine myths barely touch the true depths of their sacred ceremonies. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights, or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your toes sink into the warm sands of Crete, a little island that's been the talk of the Aegean Sea since around 2000 BCE. Sure, everyone's yapping about Egypt and its pyramids, but let's not forget the Minoans, who were busy carving out their own niche in the world with a flair for the dramatic and a penchant for the peculiar. Crete is like the ancient Mediterranean's luxury getaway spot, smack dab in the middle of key trade routes. Those Minoans were no fools. They knew how to turn geography into gold. Now, why does this island paradise matter to you, a humble ancient islander? Well, whoever said location is everything was onto something. Crete's position meant you were right at the confluence of Europe, Asia, and Africa. These connections fed into a culture that was as vibrant as the azure sea surrounding you. Trade wasn't just a way to get your hands on the latest Egyptian bling or Babylonian gadgets. It was a cultural exchange program on steroids. Goods flowed in, but so did ideas, and that melting pot vibe. It shaped everything from your fashion sense to the way you worshipped. Speaking of worship, let's talk palaces. Forget your run-of-the-mill stone huts. The Minoans built palatial complexes that screamed power and opulence. Knossos, Phaistos, Malia, these weren't just places to stash the king's treasures. They were administrative hubs, religious centers, and the beating heart of Minoan society. Knossos alone covered roughly 150,000 square feet. That's bigger than 20 football fields plastered together, and it was teeming with rooms, corridors, and of course, the famous frescoes that turned walls into storytelling canvases. Living in this labyrinthine luxury, you'd be mingling with a society that wasn't just about pretty pictures and pottery. Minoans had a knack for bureaucracy that would make modern-day office workers weep with envy. You had scribes jotting down inventories on clay tablets in a script called lineae. Spoiler alert, we still can't decipher it, which is every archaeologist's nightmare and every conspiracy theorist's dream. But what we do know is that these tablets give a peek into a well-oiled administrative machine. Now, let's zoom in on the religious scene. This isn't your typical toga-wearing or a colasking affair. The Minoan priests were the rock stars of the ancient world, but not for the reasons you might think. Imagine a world where bulls aren't just barnyard animals, but symbolically charged creatures that are central to religious ceremonies. Bulls and their horns are all over Minoan art, and bull leaping was a popular ritual. Yes, you heard right. Young acrobats would vault over bulls in a mix of grace and insanity that makes modern extreme sports look tame. But don't let the flashy bull shows fool you. The priests weren't just about spectacle. They wielded real power. They were the intermediaries between the gods and the people, and their rituals were key to ensuring everything, from crop yields to trade wins, went their way. The Minoans didn't have a specific word for priest. Instead, they used terms that translate to servants of the god. Humble, right? Except these servants were often from elite families, blending religious and political influence into a potent cocktail of control. In this society, the line between myth and reality was blurrier than a drunken scribe's tablet. Take the labyrinth myth, for example. Everyone loves the story of the Minotaur, but the real kicker is how it probably originated from the complex floor plans of places like Knossos. Those corridors could confuse even the most seasoned of ancient GPS systems. And King Minos, he's likely based on a series of rulers, a title morphing into legend over time. It's a classic case of history going viral in the ancient world. Economic prosperity was both the cause and effect of these religious practices. You see, the Minoans were as cunning as they were cultured. They established trade links with Egypt, the Near East, and the Cyclades. They exported timber, olive oil, saffron, and ceramics, bringing back luxury items like gold, ivory, and precious stones. All this trade required divine favor, or at least the appearance of it, which is where our priestly pals came in. Rituals were as much about maintaining the economy as they were about spiritual devotion. So, here you are, standing in the shadow of these palatial wonders, participating in rituals that bind your community together, while the priests, those punchline-loving, power-wielding intermediaries, do their thing. It's a world where belief, politics, and economics are braided together tighter than the knots on a Minoan toga. And as you go about your daily life, you can't help but feel the weight of this vibrant, mysterious culture that's both a product of its environment and a master of its destiny. Welcome to Crete, the island where the ancient world's most intriguing stories are still waiting to be fully unraveled. Now, as you navigate the buzzing hive of activity that is Minoan Crete, let's delve into the mystical world of Minoan priests and their iconography. Picture a religious ceremony where the air is thick with incense and anticipation, not unlike that moment just before the lights dim at a rock concert. At the center of it all stands the labrys, the double axe, gleaming in the Mediterranean sun, a symbol so powerful it could give Thor's hammer a run for its money. This wasn't just any axe. The labrys was both a tool and a talisman. You see it carved into stone, etched into jewelry, and even adorning walls in those sprawling palaces. But why the obsession with a double axe, you ask? Well, the labrys was the Swiss army knife of Minoan symbolism, representing everything from divine power to gender balance. It was closely associated with the goddess figures, suggesting that this society had a matriarchal, or at least a more balanced view of gender roles compared to some of its contemporaries. And just when you thought the Minoans couldn't get any more intriguing, they throw bulls into the mix. Bulls were central to Minoan religious iconography. Think of them as the ancient world's version of a blockbuster franchise. You've got the horns of consecration, bull-leaping frescoes, and the famous Minotaur myth, which, let's be honest, is both fantastical and a touch terrifying. But behind the legends, there's a kernel of truth. Bulls were probably not just symbolic, but also sacrificial, their lives given to appease the gods in a ceremonious blend of awe and brutality. Now, let's talk about those ceremonies. Imagine the spectacle. Priests clad in elaborate garments, possibly even wearing bull masks, performing rituals that would make a modern-day festival look like a backyard barbecue. These weren't just spiritual acts, but social events that reinforced the priest's status and the religious hierarchy. The priestly class had a monopoly on interpreting the divine will, making them as indispensable as the Wi-Fi password at a cafe. But don't let the grandeur fool you. These ceremonies had a down-to-earth purpose. They were the ancient equivalent of a public service announcement, reminding everyone of societal norms and the gods' expectations. In this tightly woven fabric of religion and politics, the Minoans had to strike a delicate balance between pleasing the divine and keeping the populace in line. It's not hard to see why they leaned heavily on symbols like the labrys and the bull. These were shorthands for power, continuity, and the divine order. Speaking of divine order, let's not forget the labyrinth. This legendary maze was said to house the Minotaur, a creature born from a scandalous affair between a queen and a divine bull. While that's the kind of story that keeps mythologists up at night, the real labyrinth might have been more of an architectural marvel than a monster's playground. The intricate floor plans of Knossos and other palatial sites certainly support the idea that these buildings inspired the legend. It's a testament to human nature that we'd rather imagine a monstrous hybrid lurking in a maze than accept that, sometimes, a complex is just a complex. And what about the Minotaur itself? If you strip away the myth, you're left with a cautionary tale about human hubris and beastly desires, wrapped up in a neat little package of symbolism. The Minotaur's story served as a reminder of the dangers of crossing the guards and the pitfalls of unchecked power. In a society where the lines between myth and reality were as blurred as a late-night tavern brawl, these tales carried weighty lessons. But let's bring it back to the priests, those enigmatic figures who stood at the crossroads of myth and reality. They wielded symbols like the labrys, not just as religious tools, but as political statements. It's a testament to their savvy that they managed to blend spirituality with social control so seamlessly. Imagine being both the spiritual guide and the political advisor. Talk about job security. In the grand tapestry of Minoan society, each thread, from trade routes to religious rituals, was interconnected. The priests, with their sacred symbols and elaborate ceremonies, were the weavers, ensuring that the fabric remained intact. It's this intricate dance of belief, power, and pragmatism that makes the Minoans a fascinating chapter in history. And as we peel back the layers of myth and reality, we find that the truth is often as captivating as the legend. But there's more to uncover, and our journey into the world of the Minoans is far from over. Stick around as we continue to unravel the mysteries of Crete, where history and mythology collide in spectacular fashion. Let's dive deeper into the Minoan world, where the priesthood was less about divine whispers and more about keeping the economic engine purring like a well-fed lion. You see, the Minoans were no strangers to the art of the deal, and their priests played an essential role in this high-stakes game. Crete wasn't just a sunny vacation spot. It was a bustling hub of commerce, strategically situated at the crossroads of ancient trade routes with Egypt and the Near East. This prime location made it the Mediterranean's version of Wall Street, but with more togas and less insider trading. Well, maybe. Now, let's talk cold, hard cash, or whatever the ancient equivalent was. The religious sites in Crete, those sprawling palaces and sanctuaries, didn't come cheap. Maintaining them required a steady flow of resources, which the priests were more than happy to manage. The cost of keeping these places running was astronomical, not unlike the budget for a blockbuster film. Think about it. Palatial complexes like Knossos, with their elaborate frescoes and labyrinthine corridors, needed a small army of artisans, laborers, and servants just to keep the lights on, or the oil lamps, anyway. But where did all this wealth come from? Here's where our priestly pals got crafty. The Minoans traded everything from olive oil to saffron, ceramics to timber, and in return, they imported luxury items from Egypt and the Near East like gold, ivory, and exotic spices. Not exactly pocket change. The priests ensured that trade agreements were blessed by the gods, or at least that's what they told everyone. This divine seal of approval was crucial in a world where bad luck was often attributed to a deity's displeasure. In reality, these rituals and ceremonies were as much about economic strategy as they were about spirituality. The priests were like ancient stockbrokers, monitoring market trends and ensuring the flow of goods, and more importantly, wealth into the island's coffers. They weren't just chanting incantations and sacrificing bulls. They were negotiating peace treaties and trade deals that would make today's diplomats nod in respect. The Minoan priesthood wielded significant economic power, their influence stretching across the Aegean like the ripples of a stone cast into the sea. And let's not forget the hefty price tag attached to these religious roles. Becoming a priest was no small feat. It required connections, and often a substantial financial investment. You didn't just stroll into a temple and pick up a divine staff. The priestly class was predominantly drawn from the elite, those with the means to afford such a position. It was a classic case of who you know and what you can bring to the table, or the altar in this case. This brings us to the myth-busting portion of today's program. The romantic image of the pious, selfless priest devoted solely to the gods. That's about as accurate as a Hollywood historical drama. Sure, there was spirituality involved, but let's be real. Money, power, and politics were equally vital ingredients in this ancient recipe. The Minoan priests were savvy operators, balancing their roles as spiritual leaders and economic powerhouses with the finesse of a tightrope walker over a pit of hungry minotaurs. Speaking of minotaurs, remember how these mythical creatures were said to lurk within labyrinths. The reality was likely more mundane, but no less fascinating. The labyrinths of Knossos and other sites were architectural wonders, designed to awe and intimidate. They symbolized the complexity of Minoan society, where every corridor and chamber had a purpose, much like the intricate networks of trade and politics that underpinned their civilization. This blend of myth and reality created a society where the priesthood's influence was as pervasive as the scent of saffron wafting through the palace halls. They were the custodians of both spiritual and economic stability, ensuring that the Minoan ships sailed smoothly across the azure waters, laden with goods and guarded by the favor of the gods. Or so the story went. As we leave this bustling marketplace of ideas and delve further into the Minoan world, remember this. The priests of Crete were the ultimate multitaskers, juggling spirituality, economics, and politics with a dexterity that would leave even the most seasoned of modern-day moguls impressed. So, next time you imagine the majestic palaces of Crete, Think not just of the frescoes and bull-leaping acrobats, but of the intricate web of trade agreements, divine decrees, and economic strategies that kept the wheels turning in this ancient powerhouse. Our journey through the labyrinth of Minoan history is far from over, so stay tuned as we continue to unravel the secrets of this enigmatic civilization. As we sail further into the choppy seas of Minoan society, let's dock momentarily at the port of political intrigue. Because what's a civilization without a little drama, right? When it comes to the Minoan priests and their influence on governance, the plot thickens like a rich saffron stew. You see, the Minoan priests weren't just hanging out in temples, perfecting their bull-leaping routines or polishing their labyrinths. They were deeply entrenched in the political landscape, operating in a space where religion and governance were as intertwined as vines on a trellis. Picture this, a priesthood that not only had the guards on speed dial, but also held a key to the decision-making vault of the ruling elite. Let's break it down with some facts and figures. The palatial complexes, like Knossos, were not just architectural marvels, but nerve centers of power. The priests, often from the upper echelons of society, had the ear of the ruling class. They were the original influencers, shaping policy with rituals and divinations that were, let's face it, more about reinforcing their own status than appeasing divine beings. The symbiotic relationship between the priesthood and the ruling elite was akin to a mutually beneficial business merger. The elite needed the priests to legitimize their power, nothing like a divine endorsement to solidify your grip on the throne, right? Meanwhile, the priests required the elite to maintain their own social standing and access to resources. It was a classic case of quid pro quo, ancient style. Now, if you're thinking this sounds a bit too harmonious, let's sprinkle in some reality. The narrative of a peaceful Minoan society has been around for ages, but it's more myth than fact. Conflict and power struggles simmered beneath the surface, often within the religious framework itself. Evidence suggests that these priests weren't above a little political maneuvering to maintain their influence. Think of them as the chess masters of Crete, strategically moving pieces on a board where each move could make or break their position. Archaeological findings, such as the ruins of Akrotiri on Thera, hint at the darker side of Minoan life. The island was buried under volcanic ash, but its preserved frescoes and artifacts tell tales of possible internal strife. Some scholars argue that the palatial centers were not just administrative hubs, but also fortresses designed to withstand siege, hardly the hallmark of a society at peace. But why the need for such fortifications? Well, when you're sitting on one of the most coveted pieces of real estate in the ancient world, everyone wants a slice of the pie. Crete's strategic location made it a magnet for both trade and tension. The priests and rulers had to navigate a complex web of alliances and rivalries, both within and beyond their shores. Back to the priests. These guys were the ultimate multitaskers, juggling roles that included diplomat, economic advisor, and when necessary, political schemer. Their influence on governance was profound, shaping policies that affected everything from agricultural practices to trade agreements. And like any good power broker, they knew when to play their cards close to the chest and when to show their hand. This isn't to say that the Minoans were constantly at each other's throats. Far from it. Their society thrived on a delicate balance of cooperation and competition. The priesthood played a pivotal role in maintaining this equilibrium, using religious ceremonies as a means of reinforcing social order and quelling dissent. Yet, the image of a purely theocratic society is misleading. The Minoan political landscape was more akin to a patchwork quilt where various factions vied for influence. The priests were just one part of this intricate tapestry, albeit a significant one. Their ability to sway public opinion and shape policy was a testament to their savvy as both spiritual leaders and political operators. So, as we continue to unravel the mysteries of Minoan Crete, remember this. The priests were not merely passive participants in the dance of governance. They were active choreographers, spinning tales of divine will and earthly power with equal dexterity. And while the legends of their exploits may be shrouded in myth, the reality of their influence is as tangible as the clay tablets they left behind. Our journey through this labyrinth of history is far from over. There's still more to uncover about this enigmatic civilization, where the lines between myth and reality blur like the horizon at sea. So, keep your sails set and your wits sharp as we continue to explore the fascinating world of the Minoans. As we venture further into the heart of Minoan civilization, the resonance of their religious practices echoes through the corridors of history. The Minoans, with their mix of myth and ritual, left an indelible mark not just on their island of Crete, but on the tapestry of cultures that followed. You see, the Greeks, those darlings of classical antiquity, weren't immune to a little cultural borrowing. And boy, did they borrow with gusto. Take the labyrinth, for instance. While modern minds can't get enough of the Minotaur myth, the Greeks saw more than just a monstrous bedtime story. They took the concept of the labyrinth and spun it into a metaphor for life's complexities, a theme woven through Greek literature and philosophy like a thread in their famous chittens. And those Minoan bulls, the Greeks didn't let them go to pasture. They transformed them into the myth of Theseus and the Minotaur, a tale of bravery and cunning that would make Hollywood scriptwriters salivate. But let's not get lost in the mythology. The real legacy of the Minoans lies in the way their religious practices laid the groundwork for Greek rituals. The Minoans' blend of spectacle and spirituality influenced the Greeks' own religious festivals. You know the ones, those raucous affairs that were part worship, part social event, and all about reinforcing societal hierarchies. Sound familiar? It's like the Minoans wrote the first draft, and the Greeks added the footnotes. Now, if you're wondering why these ancient rituals still hold our fascination, the answer lies in their mystery and sheer audacity. I mean, who wouldn't be captivated by tales of athletic youths leaping over bulls, or priests donning elaborate masks to commune with the divine? It's the kind of drama that reality TV producers can only dream of. And let's not forget the darker side, like the sacrificial elements that remind us of the brutal realities behind the myths. It's a cocktail of intrigue that keeps historians and mythologists up at night. But what can modern societies learn from this ancient blend of myth and reality? For starters, the Minoans teach us about the power of storytelling. Their myths weren't just entertaining tales. They were tools of social cohesion and political control. They understood that stories shape perceptions, guide behavior, and when wielded wisely, can legitimize power. It's a lesson that echoes through the ages, from the pages of history books to the digital screens of our time. Moreover, the Minoans remind us of the importance of adaptability. Their ability to fuse different cultural influences into their religious practices was a testament to their resilience and openness to change. In a world that's constantly shifting, this adaptability is as relevant today as it was millennia ago. The Minoans navigated the complexities of their world by embracing diversity, a lesson that resonates in our increasingly interconnected global society. And of course, there's the lesson of caution. The romantic appeal of Minoan rituals is tempered by the reality of their potential for manipulation. The priests, with their dual roles as spiritual leaders and economic strategists, were adept at using religion to maintain social order. It's a reminder of the thin line between faith and control, a line that societies continue to tread carefully. So, as we conclude our journey through the labyrinth of Minoan history, let's take a moment to appreciate the legacy of this enigmatic civilization. Their influence on later cultures, particularly the Greeks, is a testament to the power of cultural exchange and the enduring allure of myth. The Minoans may have vanished into the mists of time, but their legacy lives on in the stories we tell and the lessons we learn. And as we navigate our own complex world, perhaps we can take a page from the Minoans' playbook, embracing the past while forging our own path through the maze of history. Albert Einstein, the poster child for book smarts and wild-haired genius, wasn't always the darling of academia. In fact, if you'd met him as a schoolboy, you might have thought he was more likely to invent excuses than revolutionary theories. Born in 1879 in the quaint town of Ulm, Germany, his early years were less about academic triumphs and more about stubborn individuality. Spoiler alert, Einstein was no teacher's pet. Let's start with a little-known fact that might surprise you. Einstein didn't speak fluently until he was about 3. His parents even consulted a doctor, slightly worried that their future Nobel laureate might not be all that sharp. And when he finally did start talking, he preferred to talk to himself, quietly under his breath. It's as if his brain was already contemplating the universe, but his mouth wasn't quite ready to spill the beans yet. Fast forward to school, And young Albert was not exactly turning heads with his rebellious attitude toward conventional education. Teachers thought he was lazy, and classmates probably found him a bit odd. He was the kid who daydreamed out of the classroom window, lost in thought, while the rest of the class was busy reciting multiplication tables. If school had Yelp reviews, Einstein would have left a scathing 1-star rating. In a twist of delicious irony, Albert hated rote learning. He was one of those students who questioned why when told to memorize facts, driving his teachers up the wall. The Prussian education system of the late 19th century was as rigid as a German pretzel, and Einstein found it suffocating. He later described his teachers as drill sergeants, which gives you an idea of how much he enjoyed his lessons. The system was designed to create obedient bureaucrats, not free-thinking physicists. As if his academic indifference wasn't enough, Einstein also had a sartorial quirk. He refused to wear socks. That's right, no socks. According to him, they were an unnecessary hassle because they always ended up with holes. So he simply bypassed them altogether. His refusal to conform even extended to his wardrobe, which is probably why he didn't win any best-dressed awards in school. Despite his apparent ambivalence, young Einstein wasn't entirely lost in the maze of academia. He found solace in mathematics and physics, subjects that didn't demand rote memorization, but rather encouraged the kind of abstract thinking he adored. His uncle, Jakob Einstein, played a crucial role here, introducing Albert to the beauty of algebra and giving him a glimpse into a world where questions were more important than answers. By the time he was a teenager, Einstein's rebellious nature had reached new heights. At 16, he dropped out of high school in Munich, because why not, and applied to the Swiss Federal Polytechnic in Zurich. You might think he breezed through the entrance exams with his future genius credentials, but no. He flunked the non-mathematical portion spectacularly, forcing him to attend a Swiss school to brush up on his weak areas. Talk about a humbling experience. In 1896, Einstein finally enrolled in the Polytechnic, majoring in physics and mathematics, and it was here that his unconventional thinking began to take shape. He approached science like an artist, seeing it as a canvas for his curiosity. While his classmates probably spent their nights cramming for exams, Einstein was often found in heated discussions about electromagnetic fields. A student after the school bell, indeed. It's easy to forget that, behind the myth of Einstein, the genius was a young man who struggled against the confines of a rigid system, determined to march to the beat of his own drum, or, in his case, to the rhythm of the cosmos. His early years were less about being an academic prodigy, and more about finding a path that suited his unique vision. This is where Einstein's journey truly begins. From a kid who couldn't stand school to a dropout who redefined physics, his life is a testament to the power of curiosity and the importance of thinking differently. The seeds of rebellion and nonconformity that he sowed in his youth would eventually blossom into revolutionary ideas that flipped the world of physics on its head. So, next time someone tells you to follow the rules, just remember, the future E equals MC2 inventor started by questioning every single one. And so, young Einstein, the high school dropout who couldn't stand the monotony of rote learning, embarked on a path that would lead him to disrupt the very fabric of physics. Enter 1905, Einstein's annus mirabilis, or miracle year, or as I like to call it, the year when the universe got a major upgrade courtesy of a patent clerk. Let's put this into perspective. Einstein was working at the Swiss Patent Office in Bern, earning a modest salary of about 500 Swiss francs a year, which was enough to keep his coffee cup full, but probably not enough to buy any luxury Swiss watches. While the rest of his colleagues were busy examining inventions that promised to change the world, spoiler alert, most didn't. Einstein was moonlighting as a theoretical physicist, scribbling down equations that would actually deliver on that promise. Now, let's talk about the big hitters of 1905. Einstein published not one, not two, but 4 groundbreaking papers in the Annalen der Physik, a prestigious scientific journal. It's like batting 1,000 in baseball, but with brain power instead of a bat. First up was his paper on the photoelectric effect, where he proposed that light was made up of packets of energy called quanta. This little revelation laid the groundwork for quantum theory. And guess what? It later won him a Nobel Prize in 1921, though not for relativity, because, you know, irony. Next, he tackled Brownian motion, providing empirical evidence for the existence of atoms. Before Einstein, atoms were more of a philosophical concept than a scientific reality. His work gave scientists the confidence to start seeing the universe as a vast collection of tiny particles, even if they couldn't see them directly. Then, Einstein really started to flex his intellectual muscles with his paper on special relativity. Ever heard of E equals mc2, the most famous equation in the universe? Yep, that's the one. This paper challenged the very way we understand time and space, suggesting that they are not absolute but relative and intertwined, like a cosmic dance where the tempo depends on your perspective. It's a theory so mind-bending that even the smartest folks at the time probably needed a stiff drink to wrap their heads around it. Finally, he wrote about mass-energy equivalence, proposing that mass and energy are two sides of the same coin. This wasn't just some abstract notion. It had real-world implications, suggesting that a small amount of mass could be converted into a huge amount of energy. It was the intellectual precursor to nuclear power, although back then, no one was quite ready to unleash that kind of energy. Here's where the myth-busting comes in. While many picture Einstein working in a lab filled with bubbling beakers and chalkboards, the reality was far less glamorous. Picture a modest office, stacks of patent applications, and a young man lost in thought, pen in hand, probably wondering if his lunch break could be extended by a few more minutes. Einstein's brilliance lay in his ability to separate the mundane from the monumental, using his day job as mental downtime to let his revolutionary ideas simmer. His position at the patent office was a blessing in disguise. It offered a steady income and, more importantly, ample time to think. The job was routine, allowing him to maintain a work-life balance that most of us can only dream of. While his colleagues were busy drowning in paperwork, Einstein was busy recalibrating our understanding of reality. But let's not romanticize it too much. The Swiss patent office wasn't exactly Hogwarts, and Einstein wasn't some magical prodigy. He was a man who, despite facing the drudgery of daily life, found moments of clarity that led to scientific breakthroughs. It's a testament to the power of curiosity and perseverance, even when the world seems determined to pigeonhole you into a 9-to-5 routine. As Einstein's theories began to circulate, the scientific community was understandably skeptical. After all, he was just a patent clerk. What did he know about the intricacies of the universe? Yet, slowly and surely, his ideas started gaining traction. The world was beginning to notice, albeit grudgingly, the genius hidden behind the unassuming facade of a civil servant. Einstein's miracle year wasn't just about changing physics. It was about redefining what it means to be a scientist. He showed that you didn't need a fancy title or a prestigious position to make a mark on the world. All you needed was a relentless curiosity and the courage to question everything. And question everything he did, leaving behind a legacy that's as much about the spirit of inquiry as it is about equations and theories. As we move forward in Einstein's story, let's remember that the path to greatness is often paved with skepticism and routine. But when you dare to think differently, you might just find yourself rewriting the rules of the universe, one patent application at a time. And so, as the scientific world reluctantly came to terms with the idea that their newest hero had been moonlighting as a patent clerk, Einstein's journey took a sharp turn into the realm of celebrity. Suddenly, this unassuming physicist with a penchant for Sarkler style was thrust into the limelight, and the world couldn't get enough. You know you've made it big when your theoretical papers become mainstream conversation starters. It's like having your latest physics theory trending on Twitter, only with fewer hashtags and more puzzled expressions. Einstein's transition to global icon status wasn't just about his groundbreaking theories. It was also about the man himself. His hair, oh, that hair, became almost as famous as his equations. It was as if each wild strand pointed in a different direction, much like his ideas. His untamed locks became the symbol of the mad scientist archetype, a myth that's as enduring as it is inaccurate. Let's set the record straight. Einstein was more eccentric genius than mad scientist, though I suppose the line can get a bit blurry when you're redefining the laws of the universe. By the time the 1920s rolled around, Einstein was a bona fide celebrity. Imagine rock star status, but in the intellectual realm. His lectures were standing room only, attracting not just scientists, but the curious public. People flocked to hear the man who dared to say that time wasn't an absolute tick-tock of a grandfather clock, but a pliable dimension that could bend and stretch. Here was a guy turning the known universe into a Salvador Dali painting, and audiences were eating it up. Yet, despite the adulation, Einstein remained refreshingly grounded. He was known for his quick wit and self-deprecating humor. When asked to explain his theory of relativity in simple terms, he quipped, "Put your hand on a hot stove for a minute, and it seems like an hour. Sit with a pretty girl for an hour, and it seems like a minute. That's relativity." If only all science could be explained with such cheeky charm. But fame came with its own set of challenges. Einstein's theories were not universally accepted at first, far from it. The scientific community was split, with some embracing his ideas and others, well, not so much. It wasn't until 1919, when a solar eclipse provided empirical evidence supporting his theory of general relativity, that skeptics started to take him seriously. The findings showed that starlight bent around the sun, just as Einstein had predicted. The Times of London declared, "Revolution in science, new theory of the universe, Newtonian ideas overthrown." Talk about a mic drop moment. Einstein's newfound fame also meant that he had to navigate the political and social tumult of the era. Post-World War I Europe was a cauldron of economic hardship and political instability, and Einstein, with his Jewish heritage, became a target for anti-Semitic vitriol. Yet, he remained steadfast in his commitment to peace and humanitarian causes, using his platform to advocate for disarmament and civil rights. He was a scientist with a conscience, a rarity in any age. In 1921, Einstein's contributions to science were formally recognized when he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics. But here's where the irony gets delicious. He didn't win for his theory of relativity. Nope, the Nobel Committee played it safe and awarded him the prize for his explanation of the photoelectric effect, a far less controversial choice at the time. It's like giving a Grammy to the Beatles for their lesser-known B-sides rather than their groundbreaking albums. But hey, a Nobel's a Nobel, and it came with a hefty 121,572 Swedish krona, enough to keep Einstein in socks, had he wanted them, for a lifetime. Despite his celebrity status, Einstein's life was anything but glamorous. He was a man driven by an insatiable curiosity, often so lost in thought that he would forget to eat. Friends and colleagues would find him scribbling equations on any available surface, from napkins to tablecloths, much to the chagrin of restaurant owners. It was as if his mind couldn't stop whirring long enough for him to enjoy a proper meal. But then again, who needs dinner when you're unraveling the mysteries of the cosmos? Einstein's fame brought with it a peculiar kind of immortality. He became the face of scientific genius, his name synonymous with braininess. Need to describe someone as smart. Just call them an Einstein, and everyone nods in agreement, even if they can't explain special relativity. His likeness has adorned everything from T-shirts to posters, a testament to his enduring legacy in popular culture. But let's not forget the real man behind the myth, a humble physicist with a wicked sense of humor and a penchant for pushing boundaries. As his fame grew, Einstein's life became a series of lectures, public appearances, and interviews, all while he continued to work on his scientific pursuits. He traveled extensively, sharing his ideas with audiences around the world. His trips to the United States were particularly notable, as he became something of a scientific ambassador, bridging cultural gaps with his charm and intellect. In 1933, with the rise of the Nazi regime, Einstein made the difficult decision to leave Germany for good, eventually settling in Princeton, New Jersey, where he joined the Institute for Advanced Study. Einstein's move to America marked a new chapter in his life, one where he could focus on his research without the looming threat of political persecution. Yet, even in his new home, he remained a vocal advocate for peace and justice, using his influence to speak out against racism and inequality. He was a scientist with a heart, a rare combination that endeared him to many, but also made him a target for criticism. Despite the challenges and controversies, Einstein's legacy continued to grow. His theories laid the groundwork for numerous scientific advancements, from nuclear energy to GPS technology. He was a pioneer, a trailblazer, and a visionary, all rolled into one. Perhaps his most significant contribution was his unwavering belief in the power of curiosity and imagination. In a world that often values conformity over creativity, Einstein's life serves as a reminder that sometimes it's the daydreamers, the questioners, and the rebels who change the world. Einstein's legacy of curiosity and imagination was just one side of the coin. The flip side was a man deeply entrenched in the political and social struggles of his time. As he settled into life in America, Einstein's focus wasn't solely on the cosmos. He also turned his formidable intellect to earthly matters, becoming as much a political activist as a physicist. This was a man who didn't just ponder the universe. He wanted to change the world. Let's face it, Einstein wasn't just a lab-bound genius wielding equations like a wand. No, he was out there, sleeves rolled up, diving into the messy business of human rights and peace. Take his stance on pacifism, for instance. Einstein was an outspoken critic of war, which, let's be honest, isn't the most popular opinion during times of global conflict. He was a member of the League of Nations International Committee on Intellectual Cooperation and used his platform to denounce militarism, famously stating, "I am not only a pacifist, but a militant pacifist. I am willing to fight for peace." A bit of a paradox, perhaps, but one that underscores the complexity of his views. Einstein's activism didn't stop at war. He was a vocal advocate for civil rights, particularly in the United States, where he found himself appalled by the racial injustices he witnessed. He joined the NAACP and formed a close friendship with civil rights leader W.E.B. Du Bois. In 1946, he gave a speech at Lincoln University in Pennsylvania, the first degree-granting historically black college in the United States, declaring racism to be a disease of white people. This wasn't just lip service. Einstein put his money where his mouth was, supporting anti-lynching campaigns and speaking out against segregation. But perhaps the most complex and controversial chapter in Einstein's political life was his relationship with the atomic bomb. Here was a man whose equation, E equals mc2, laid the theoretical groundwork for nuclear fission, a scientific triumph with a moral conundrum attached. In 1939, Einstein co-authored a letter to President Franklin D. Roosevelt, warning that Nazi Germany might develop an atomic weapon. This letter led to the Manhattan Project and the eventual creation of the atomic bomb. Talk about a Pandora's box moment. Yet, despite his role in this chain of events, Einstein was haunted by the use of nuclear weapons. After the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, he became a staunch advocate for nuclear disarmament, lamenting, "The unleashed power of the atom has changed everything save our modes of thinking, and thus we drift toward unparalleled catastrophe." He spent his later years campaigning for peace, joining the Emergency Committee of Atomic Scientists to warn the public about the dangers of nuclear proliferation. Einstein's multifaceted persona debunks the myth of a purely scientific genius. He was a man of contradictions, a thinker who grappled with the ethical implications of his work. He wasn't content to sit on the sidelines as the world burned. He felt a responsibility to use his fame for good, even if it meant ruffling a few feathers along the way. He once quipped, "A foolish faith in authority is the worst enemy of truth," a sentiment that drove his activism as much as his scientific inquiry. And let's not overlook the economic realities of his time. The 1930s and 40s were marked by the Great Depression and World War II, eras where political and economic instability were as common as Einstein's wild hair. He was acutely aware of the economic underpinnings of war, noting that wars will continue as long as nations cling to the profits that accompany them. It's a stark reminder that even scientific geniuses can't escape the gritty realities of money and politics. Despite his fame, or perhaps because of it, Einstein was often a target for criticism. His outspoken views made him a lightning rod for controversy, particularly during the Red Scare, when his progressive politics led to accusations of communism. In 1950, he was even asked to testify before the House Un-American Activities Committee, a request he flatly refused, likening it to the witch hunts of Salem. Einstein's later years were a testament to the power of one voice, even when that voice was more accustomed to discussing quantum mechanics than civil rights. He demonstrated that the pursuit of knowledge shouldn't be divorced from the pursuit of justice, a lesson as relevant today as it was in his time. His life was a kaleidoscope of science and activism, with each facet reflecting a different aspect of his complex personality. As we continue to unravel the story of this iconic figure, it's clear that Albert Einstein was more than just the sum of his equations. He was a man whose heart and mind were as expansive as the universe he sought to understand. And while the world may remember him for relativity, his legacy of activism and social conscience is equally enduring. Stay tuned, because the final chapter in the saga of Einstein's life promises to be as compelling as the rest. As the final pages of Einstein's remarkable story unfold, we find ourselves marveling not just at his scientific triumphs, but at the indelible mark he left on the human imagination. It's no exaggeration to say that his theories have become the bedrock of modern physics, influencing everything from the way we understand black holes to the technology guiding our GPS systems. If you've ever wondered how your smartphone knows precisely where you are, thank Einstein for his theory of general relativity. He took the universe's cosmic dance and choreographed the steps, ensuring that we could navigate our world with pinpoint accuracy. Einstein's influence extends beyond the realms of physics and into the very fabric of our culture. His iconic image, wild hair, mischievous grin, has been plastered on everything from t-shirts to coffee mugs, a testament to his enduring appeal. It's as if the world collectively decided that if they couldn't wrap their heads around E equals MC2, they could at least celebrate the man who conjured it. And speaking of that equation, let's clear up a common misconception. E equals MC2 didn't just pop out of nowhere like a cosmic magic trick. It was the result of years of meticulous work, a snapshot of the genius that redefined energy and mass as interchangeable. As for his quotes, well, Einstein's words have been as misinterpreted as his theories. Take the famous "God does not play dice with the universe," often cited as a dismissal of quantum mechanics' inherent randomness. In reality, it was Einstein's poetic way of expressing discomfort with the idea that the universe operates on probabilities rather than certainties. Yet, this didn't stop the quote from taking on a life of its own, used by everyone from theologians to philosophers to justify their worldviews. It's a bit like using Shakespeare to explain your dating life, entertaining but not entirely accurate. Despite his towering intellect, Einstein wasn't immune to human flaws. He struggled with personal relationships, particularly with his first wife, Milva Merrick. Their marriage, which began with shared scientific aspirations, ended in a bitter divorce. Einstein later married his cousin, Elsa Lowenthal, a union that offered stability but still grappled with the complexities of his personality. His letters reveal a man who could be both affectionate and aloof, a reminder that genius doesn't grant immunity from the everyday challenges of human connection. In one particularly candid letter, he wrote, "I have to be alone to give full play to my thoughts, an admission of the solitude often required for groundbreaking insight." Einstein's life was a tapestry woven with the threads of brilliance and imperfection, a blend of cosmic-scale thinking and very human shortcomings. While the world lauds his scientific contributions, it's easy to overlook the struggles and sacrifices that accompanied them. He wasn't just a brain on a pedestal. He was a man who navigated the turbulent waters of politics, relationships, and public expectation. His story is a poignant reminder that genius is not a shield against life's complexities, but rather a lens that intensifies them. The myths surrounding Einstein's genius often paint him as a solitary figure, an intellectual titan who needed no one. But the reality is more nuanced. His work was built on the foundations laid by others, and informed by the collaborative spirit of the scientific community. He stood on the shoulders of giants, as did all great thinkers before and after him. Yet, his ability to synthesize ideas and push boundaries was uniquely his own, a testament to the power of imagination when unshackled by convention. As we wrap up this exploration of Einstein's legacy, it's crucial to recognize the broader impact of his work. His theories challenged the status quo, inviting us to question our assumptions about the universe and our place within it. In doing so, he opened doors to new possibilities, paving the way for innovations that continue to shape our world. Whether it's unlocking the secrets of the cosmos or improving the technology we rely on, Einstein's influence is as pervasive as it is profound. In the end, Einstein's story isn't just about the equations he crafted or the theories he championed. It's about the courage to question, the tenacity to persevere, and the humility to accept one's limitations. He reminds us that the pursuit of knowledge is a journey, not a destination, and that true understanding often lies beyond the horizon of certainty. As we continue to grapple with the mysteries of the universe, we do so in the shadow of a man who dared to dream beyond the confines of his time. So, as the curtain falls on this narrative, let us not only remember Einstein as the father of modern physics, but as a beacon of curiosity and creativity. His life serves as both an inspiration and a cautionary tale, urging us to embrace the unknown while remaining grounded in our humanity. In a world that often prizes conformity, Einstein's legacy is a clarion call to celebrate the power of unconventional thinking. As we drift off to sleep, let us carry with us the knowledge that the universe is vast, our understanding of it ever-evolving, and the spirit of inquiry as timeless as the stars themselves. Marco Polo. The name alone conjures up images of exotic lands, treacherous journeys, and a man who could probably sell sand to a Bedouin. But before we get carried away with visions of swashbuckling adventures, let's get one thing straight. Marco wasn't just a wanderlust-stricken tourist with a penchant for storytelling. He was, above all, a businessman. In the 13th century, the Polo family was to trade what the Kardashians are to reality TV. They were merchants with a keen eye for profit and an uncanny knack for sniffing out opportunity, no matter how far-flung. In Marco's time, the world was knee-deep in the spice trade. Think of it as the medieval version of a gold rush, except instead of panning for gold, you were sniffing out saffron. Spices like pepper, cinnamon, and nutmeg were the Bitcoin of the 1200s, fueling economies, spicing up bland diets, and making merchants fabulously wealthy. We're talking about a time when a pound of nutmeg could set you back 7 fat cows, or an entire city's annual rent. And Venice, Marco's stomping ground, was the Wall Street of this spice-fueled economy, a bustling hub of trade where fortunes were made and lost faster than you can say Silk Road. Speaking of family affairs, Marco's father, Niccolo, and his uncle, Maffei, were the original Polo brothers. No, not the ones who invented the shirt, but the ones who first ventured to the East. They weren't just dabbling in the family business. They were expanding it on a scale that would make any modern entrepreneur green with envy. While most folks were content trading with their neighbors, the Polo brothers had their eyes set on the riches of the Mongol Empire. Their first trip to Asia was like a 13th century startup pitch, and they returned with something more valuable than a business deal, an invitation from Kublai Khan himself. Enter Marco, a young Venetian with more curiosity than caution and a knack for languages that would put Google Translate to shame. The year was 1271, when he set off on his epic journey to the court of Kublai Khan, a trip that would span 24 years and cover some 15,000 miles. Let's be clear, this wasn't a leisurely gap-year jaunt. Travel in the medieval era made modern budget airlines look luxurious. Forget first class or even economy. Think more along the lines of walking, horseback riding, and the occasional camel caravan. The journey from Venice to Beijing was a logistical nightmare, with more moving parts than a Rube Goldberg machine. Now, let's talk about the practicalities of such a trip. A medieval road trip checklist wasn't just about packing a good book and some snacks. The Polos needed to prepare for every possible disaster nature and human ingenuity could throw at them. First, they had to secure safe passage through countless territories, each with its own rules, taxes, and let's face it, not so friendly border control. There were no Google Maps to reroute when things got dicey, and the only Yelp reviews came from fellow travelers who might or might not have made it back to tell the tale. The Polos had to fund this expedition, which was no small feat. Financing a journey of this scale required a financial acumen that would leave modern venture capitalists in awe. They needed goods to trade along the way, silks, precious metals, and of course, spices. And let's not forget the diplomatic gifts for Kublai Khan, because showing up empty-handed to the court of the world's most powerful ruler was a surefire way to end up as a footnote in history. Yet despite the odds, the Polos set out, driven by the promise of untold riches and the kind of adventure that would make any travel blogger salivate. The journey wasn't just about the destination. It was about opening new trade routes, forging alliances, and yes, bringing back tales that would make Marco Polo a household name centuries later. But before we get too swept away by the romance of it all, remember this. For every thrilling story of adventure, there's a backstory of painstaking planning, relentless negotiation, and the kind of logistical challenges that would make even Indiana Jones throw in the towel. So here we have Marco Polo, the merchant-turned-adventurer, whose journey was as much about business as it was about glory. As we delve into his travels, let's keep in mind the economic and political realities that shaped every step of his path. Because while it's easy to get lost in the myths, the real story is far richer, more complex, and yes, even more entertaining than any legend could ever be. Now, as Marco Polo and his entourage left the familiar canals of Venice behind, they embarked on a journey that would take them through the vibrant tapestry of the Middle East. Picture a road trip that makes the longest family car ride seem like a quick jaunt to the corner store. For the Polos, the Middle East was more than just a pit stop. It was the first real test of their mettle, where Marco would trade his Venetian sea legs for the sands of the desert and the bustling bazaars that would make any modern-day e-commerce site look like amateur hour. First on the itinerary, the bustling city of Acre, the last Crusader stronghold in the Holy Land. This place was a melting pot of cultures, religions, and languages, a kind of medieval United Nations, minus the diplomatic immunity. Here, Marco got his first taste of what it meant to be a foreigner in a land that was both strange and familiar. The city was a commercial hub where merchants from Europe rubbed shoulders with traders from the Islamic world, and where deals were struck faster than you could say open sesame. But Acre was just the hors d'oeuvre. The real adventure began as they ventured deeper into the Middle East, through lands where the political landscape was as shifting as the desert sands. The Polo family had to navigate territories ruled by the likes of the Seljuk Turks, the Mamluks of Egypt, and the various local emirs who held power in the region. Each stop was a new lesson in diplomacy and cultural exchange, where Marco's knack for languages came in handy. He was like a medieval Rosetta Stone, picking up Persian, Arabic, and even Mongolian along the way. And then there were the cultural exchanges, some enlightening, others downright awkward. Take the story of Marco's encounter with the Assassins, a secretive sect famed for their, shall we say, unconventional recruitment methods. Legend has it that the Assassins used hashish to indoctrinate their followers, promising paradise to those who proved their loyalty. While the idea of a medieval drug cartel might sound thrilling, the reality was more about political machinations than mystical escapades. Marco's account of the Assassins is one part fact, two parts embellished travel tale, but it does highlight the intricate web of alliances and rivalries that define the region. As Marco wove through this complex tapestry, his Venetian bargaining skills served him well. He was a master of the deal, a 13th century negotiator who could make a used camel salesman blush. Whether it was haggling over the price of silk in a Persian bazaar or brokering safe passage through a dicey mountain pass, Marco knew how to play the game. His Venetian upbringing in the mercantile heart of Europe had taught him that everything had a price, and knowing how to pay it, or better yet, how to lower it, was the key to survival. One of the more amusing anecdotes from Marco's journey involves his brush with the local customs surrounding hospitality. In some areas, guests were treated like royalty, lavished with gifts and feasts that would make even the most gluttonous nobleman blush. In others, the welcome was less grandiose, with Marco and his companions finding themselves partaking in meals that tested the limits of their culinary adventurousness. Imagine being offered fermented mare's milk, or a dish so spicy it could double as a weapon, and you've got a glimpse into the gustatory roulette that was Middle Eastern hospitality. Yet, despite the occasional faux pas, Marco's journey through the Middle East was a testament to the power of cultural exchange. He was a bridge between worlds, a conduit through which knowledge, ideas, and goods flowed. In a time when borders were both fiercely defended and easily crossed by those who knew the right people, Marco's travels remind us that being a foreigner was less about where you came from and more about how you navigated the world around you. As the Polos pushed onward, they eventually found themselves at the edge of the Mongol Empire, a vast dominion that stretched from the steppes of Central Asia to the heart of China. Here, the political landscape was defined by the might of the Mongols and the vision of their leader, Kublai Khan. The Khan's empire was a place of contradictions, where the brutality of conquest was tempered by a surprising openness to foreign influences. It was this openness that allowed Marco to thrive, his Venetian roots and his ability to adapt giving him an edge in a world where survival often depended on one's ability to navigate the intricate dance of diplomacy and commerce. And so, as Marco Polo stood on the threshold of the Mongol Empire, he was not just a traveler in a foreign land. He was a merchant, an ambassador, and perhaps most importantly, a storyteller in the making. His journey through the Middle East had been a crash course in the art of survival, a lesson in the power of cultural exchange, and an introduction to a world that was as complex as it was awe-inspiring. As the Polos continued eastward, the adventure was just beginning, and the stories they would bring back would captivate Europe for centuries to come. But for now, the road ahead was filled with promise, challenges, and the kind of encounters that would make Marco Polo a legend in his own time and beyond. As Marco Polo and his entourage finally crossed into the vast expanses of the Mongol Empire, they found themselves in a land where the word expansive was an understatement. The Mongol Empire wasn't just big, it was colossal, stretching from the fringes of Eastern Europe all the way to the shores of the Pacific, an empire so vast it made the Roman Empire look like a neighborhood block party. And at the heart of this sprawling dominion sat Kublai Khan, a leader whose reputation was as formidable as his title. Now, let's set the stage. Kublai Khan wasn't your run-of-the-mill monarch. No, he was a man with vision, ambition, and let's face it, a knack for empire building that would put any modern CEO to shame. When Marco finally arrived at Kublai's court, he was stepping into a world that was equal parts opulent and cutthroat, a place where political intrigue was the daily special and alliances were as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. So, what's the deal with Marco and Kublai? Popular legend paints a picture of Marco as the Khan's right-hand man, whispering sage advice into his ear while sipping on fermented mare's milk. But hold your horses, pun fully intended. The reality was a bit more complicated. Marco was certainly a guest at the court, but whether he was an emissary or just a particularly well-documented visitor is still up for debate. What we do know is that Marco spent about 17 years in the service of Kublai Khan, a length of time that suggests he was more than just a passing curiosity to the Mongol ruler. Kublai's court was a melting pot of cultures, languages, and power dynamics that would make the United Nations look like a high school debate club. It was a place where Chinese mandarins rubbed shoulders with Persian astrologers, and where ambassadors from far-flung corners of the known world jockeyed for the Khan's attention. Marco's role in this diplomatic circus was somewhere between a courtier and a cultural translator, navigating the complexities of Mongol politics with the kind of diplomatic finesse that would make a modern-day spin doctor proud. But let's not get carried away. While Marco might have been a favorite guest at court, wielding influence in the Mongol Empire was no walk in the park. The Mongol political system was like a chess game played on a board the size of a continent, with Kublai Khan as the ultimate grandmaster. He was a ruler who understood that power wasn't just a matter of brute force. It was about balancing the interests of his diverse empire, a task that required a delicate touch and a keen understanding of human nature. For Marco, life at court was a crash course in the art of political survival. He was a foreigner in a land where allegiances could shift faster than a Mongol horseman on a caffeine high. Navigating the court's intricacies was like walking a tightrope, one misstep away from a very unpleasant fall. But Marco had a secret weapon, his knack for storytelling. In a world where the spoken word was king, Marco's ability to spin a good yarn was worth its weight in gold, or in this case, silk and spices. Speaking of storytelling, let's address the elephant in the room, Marco's famous tales. Were they fact or fiction? A bit of both, probably. While Marco's, The Travels of Marco Polo, reads like the medieval equivalent of a blockbuster movie, complete with exotic locales and larger-than-life characters. It's important to remember that embellishment was par for the course in a time when oral tradition was the primary means of record-keeping. Marco wasn't just recounting his adventures. He was crafting a narrative that would captivate audiences and secure his place in history. Now, let's talk about the reality of courtly life. Forget the romanticized visions of lavish banquets and endless revelry. The Mongol court was a place where opulence coexisted with austerity, where the grandeur of the Khan's palace was tempered by the harsh realities of Mongol rule. While Kublai Khan was known for his patronage of the arts and his interest in foreign cultures, he was also a ruler who understood the importance of discipline and control. Court was a microcosm of the empire itself, a place where power was both centralized and decentralized, where the Khan's word was law, but local leaders retained a significant degree of autonomy. For Marco, the Mongol court was an eye-opening experience. It was a place where he witnessed firsthand the complexities of governance and the intricate dance of diplomacy that defined the Mongol Empire. It was a world where alliances were forged and broken with the flick of a wrist, where political intrigue was a way of life, and where survival depended as much on one's wits as on one's ability to navigate the shifting sands of power. But let's not forget the human side of the story. Marco's time at court was as much about personal relationships as it was about politics. He was a man who forged connections with people from all walks of life, from high-ranking officials to humble servants. These relationships were the lifeblood of his journey, providing him with the insights and experiences that would shape his understanding of the world and inform the tales he would later recount upon his return to Venice. So, as we peel back the layers of myth surrounding Marco's relationship with Kublai Khan, we find a story that's both more complex and more compelling than the legends would have us believe. It's a story of a young Venetian merchant who found himself at the heart of one of history's greatest empires, a man whose journey was as much about discovery as it was about survival. And while the myths may be seductive, the reality is that Marco Polo's adventures were shaped by the economic, political, and social forces of his time, a testament to the power of human curiosity and the enduring allure of the unknown. As Marco navigated the political waters of the Mongol court, he was also a witness to the transformative power of cross-cultural exchange. The Mongol Empire was a place where ideas, technologies, and goods flowed freely, a testament to Kublai Khan's vision of an interconnected world. It was a world where the exchange of knowledge was as valuable as the trade of silk and spices, where Marco's Venetian roots and his ability to adapt gave him a unique perspective on the challenges and opportunities of his time. But let's not sugarcoat it. Life in the Mongol Empire wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. It was a place where power was often wielded with an iron fist, where the consequences of defying the Khan could be swift and brutal. Yet, despite the challenges he faced, Marco's time in the Mongol court was a testament to his resilience and adaptability. He was a man who thrived in the face of adversity, a traveler whose journey was as much about overcoming obstacles as it was about exploring new horizons. As we delve deeper into Marco's adventures, it's important to remember that his story is more than just a tale of exploration. It's a story of cultural exchange, of the meeting of East and West, and of the enduring power of human curiosity. Marco Polo's journey was a bridge between worlds, a testament to the interconnectedness of the medieval world, and a reminder that even in the face of adversity, the human spirit is capable of remarkable feats. And so, as Marco Polo continued his journey through the heart of the Mongol Empire, he was not just a traveler in a foreign land. He was a witness to history, a participant in the great tapestry of human experience, and a storyteller whose tales would captivate generations to come. The road ahead was filled with promise and peril, but for Marco, the adventure was just beginning. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the fascinating story of Marco Polo and his journey to the East, a story that's as rich and complex as the world he set out to explore. As Marco Polo began his homeward journey from the Mongol Empire, it wasn't exactly a victory lap through the pages of history. Picture less of a triumphant hero returning with riches and more of a weary traveler, laden with exotic knickknacks and an arsenal of stories that would put Scheherazade to shame. The path back to Venice was a logistical puzzle that could stump even the savviest of medieval minds. It was the Silk Road's version of a clearance sale, where the goods were plentiful, but the price tag could leave you reeling. Now, let's talk logistics. Marco's return was no simple jaunt across the continents. The Silk Road, though romanticized as a glittering highway of commerce, was a perilous undertaking. It was a sprawling network of trade routes that stretched over 4,000 miles, complete with its own set of problems. Bandits, check. Unpredictable weather, double check. And let's not forget the ever-present threat of illness, which could strike faster than a Mongol arrow. The costs of traversing this colossal route were astronomical. Think tolls, bribes, and the occasional protection fee, a medieval euphemism for not getting robbed blind. Marco's caravan resembled a traveling circus, complete with camels laden with silk, spices, and a few souvenirs that would make any customs officer today raise an eyebrow. These weren't just trinkets, but tangible proof of his adventures, each piece a testament to the vast cultural tapestry he had navigated. But returning with these treasures came with a hefty price. The financial burden of such a journey was steep, and the logistics of moving valuable cargo through hostile territories were a nightmare that would make any modern-day logistics planner cringe. As he trudged through the harsh terrains of Central Asia, Marco's mind was undoubtedly occupied with more than just survival. The prospect of reuniting with his family was a beacon of hope in the desolate landscape. However, the task of convincing the skeptical Venetians back home of his tales loomed large. Venice, the bustling heart of the medieval trade world, was a place where tall tales were as common as gondolas. And while Marco had stories that would make the brothers Grimm look like light reading, the challenge lay in proving their authenticity. The skeptics in Venice were the medieval equivalent of internet trolls. They were quick to dismiss Marco's tales as fabrications, the wild imaginings of a man who had spent too long in foreign lands. Yet Marco had an ace up his sleeve, his flair for storytelling. His narratives, though embellished, were rooted in the reality of his experiences. He was like a medieval influencer, spinning tales that captivated audiences and left them questioning the boundaries between truth and fiction. His return was marked by a reunion that was more functional than emotional. After nearly 24 years, Marco had to re-establish himself in a society that had moved on without him. The Venice he returned to was different from the one he had left, a city that had grown and changed in his absence. The family business was still a thriving enterprise, but Marco had to prove that his experiences in the East were of value, both economically and culturally. Let's not forget the business aspect of Marco's journey. His travels opened up new trade routes and introduced Venetian merchants to goods that were previously the stuff of legend. The economic implications of his journey were significant, as he brought back not only physical commodities, but knowledge, an understanding of distant markets and cultures that would shape Venice's trade strategies for years to come. However, proving the worth of his tales was no easy feat. Marco had to contend with a Venetian audience that was both intrigued and incredulous. He was a man caught between two worlds, a bridge between East and West, and his stories were his passport. His accounts of the Mongol Empire, the court of Kublai Khan, and the exotic lands he had traversed were met with equal parts fascination and skepticism. In defending his tales, Marco had to walk a fine line. He had to embellish just enough to captivate his audience, yet remain grounded in reality to maintain credibility. This balancing act was a testament to his skills as a storyteller, a man who understood that the power of a story lay not just in its telling, but in its ability to resonate with its audience. Marco's return to Venice was a homecoming laden with challenges and opportunities. He was a man transformed by his experiences, a traveler whose journey was as much about personal growth as it was about exploration. The world he returned to was ripe for the tales he had to tell, and while his audience may have been skeptical, they were also captivated by the possibilities his stories suggested. So, as we leave Marco Polo at the threshold of his Venetian home, we find a man ready to share his adventures with a world eager for tales of distant lands and exotic peoples. His journey was far from over, as the stories he would recount would continue to shape perceptions and inspire generations. Our story isn't finished either. There's more to unravel as we delve deeper into the legacy of Marco Polo and the impact of his travels on the world he returned to. Stay tuned for more adventures, myths, and realities in the next chapter of this epic journey. And so, standing at the crossroads of myth and reality, Marco Polo was about to embark on yet another adventure, this time through the annals of history itself. Back in 1295, Venice was a city teeming with merchants, mariners, and naysayers, an ideal audience for a man who had just spent nearly a quarter of a century exploring lands more distant than the moon seemed to medieval Europeans. But here's the kicker. Marco wasn't just back with tales of grandeur. He was armed with a manuscript, the Travels of Marco Polo, which he would dictate to Rustichello da Pisa, a fellow inmate while in prison during the Venetian-Genoese War. This was less of a prison memoir and more of a travelogue that would set the groundwork for future explorers and armchair travelers alike. But let's not romanticize this too much. Marco's tales, while undoubtedly rich in detail, were often met with skepticism. Imagine trying to tell folks that you'd been to a place where people ate with sticks and paper money flowed like water. Eyes would roll faster than a Venetian gondola in a high tide. Yet, Marco's stories were precisely what the world needed, a bridge to the East at a time when Europe was just beginning to emerge from the medieval fog. The publication of The Travels of Marco Polo was like dropping a blockbuster in the middle of a literary drought. The book was a medieval bestseller, translated into multiple languages and reaching far beyond the canals of Venice. However, it's crucial to remember that this wasn't some solo endeavor. Just as Marco's journey was a family affair, his book was a collaborative effort, with Rustichello adding his own flair. Think of it as a co-written screenplay, where fact and fiction dance a complicated waltz. Now, let's tackle the elephant in the room, the romanticized notion of Marco as the lone wolf, the solitary adventurer who braved the unknown. It's a lovely image, but about as realistic as a Hollywood epic. Marco was part of a vast network of traders, scholars, and diplomats who crisscrossed the medieval world, each contributing to the flow of knowledge and goods. His journey was a collaborative effort that involved countless others, guides, translators, and fellow travelers who each played a role in the epic saga. Debunking the myth of the lone adventurer is crucial because it highlights the true nature of medieval travel, a collective enterprise where success depended on cooperation and mutual benefit. Marco wasn't just a daring explorer. He was a cog in a much larger machine that linked east and west long before the age of global flights and Wi-Fi. But let's get back to the impact of Marco's tales. His book painted a picture of the East that was at once compelling and, admittedly, a bit embellished. It was the medieval equivalent of a glossy travel brochure, complete with accounts of fantastic creatures and cities of gold. Yet, beneath the layers of hyperbole was a genuine attempt to convey the richness of the cultures he had encountered, a narrative that would shape Western perceptions of Asia for centuries to come. Marco's influence extended beyond mere storytelling. His accounts introduced Europe to the wonders of the East, sparking imaginations and igniting a curiosity that would eventually lead to the age of exploration. Figures like Christopher Columbus carried a copy of Marco's book, dreaming of finding their path to the riches of the East. While Polo's tales were sprinkled with the occasional embellishment, they were rooted in a reality that inspired explorers to chart new courses and seek new horizons. So, what can modern travelers learn from Marco Polo, aside from avoiding month-long camel treks? First, the importance of adaptability. Marco's success was not just a result of his daring spirit, but his ability to navigate diverse cultures with respect and curiosity. His knack for languages and diplomacy was his passport to the court of Kublai Khan and beyond. In a world increasingly defined by globalization, the ability to adapt and engage with different cultures is more valuable than ever. Second, the power of storytelling. Marco's tales, regardless of their embellishments, captured the imagination of a continent and brought far-off lands into the realm of possibility. Today, storytelling remains a powerful tool to connect people and places, shaping perceptions and driving curiosity. And finally, the beauty of collaboration. Marco's journey was a testament to the power of collective effort, a reminder that no great endeavor is achieved alone. Whether in business, travel, or life, the ability to work together toward a common goal often makes the difference between success and failure. As we wrap up our journey with Marco Polo, let's not forget the legacy of a man who was both a participant and a chronicler of one of history's great adventures. His stories remind us that while the world may change, the human drive to explore, connect, and understand remains as potent as ever. Marco Polo's journey was not just a trip to the East, but a testament to the enduring power of human curiosity and the stories that bind us together across time and space. So here's to Marco Polo, a merchant, a traveler, a a storyteller and an unwitting mythmaker. His adventures may be centuries old, but the lessons they impart are timeless, a reminder that our world, vast and varied, is always worth exploring. And who knows, maybe one day, when we're all zipping around in flying cars, we'll look back on Marco's camel caravans and chuckle at how far we've come, yet how much his journey still resonates. Until then, let his tales inspire us to seek out the unknown, to embrace the unfamiliar, and to tell our own stories with a flair that would make even Marco Polo proud. In the grand theatre of ancient China, where the stage was vast and the script epic, one might say the emperors were the original rock stars. These guys didn't just rule. They owned the spotlight with a flair that would make even today's biggest celebrities look like understudies. The curtain opened in 221 BC with the notorious Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor who unified China and kicked off a series of dynasties that would last until the fall of the king in 1912. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Qin Shi Huang wasn't just any ruler. He was the self-proclaimed first emperor of China, a title that screamed, "I'm the greatest, and don't you forget it." He strutted onto the scene with a divine mandate, literally. This wasn't just some fancy title. The mandate of heaven was the ultimate PR spin. It was ancient China's version of a blue checkmark on social media, only instead of verifying identity, it verified destiny. According to this celestial doctrine, an emperor was heaven's pick to lead, as long as he didn't screw things up too badly. Now, you might be wondering, how did one snag this divine endorsement? Well, it's not like they had a talent show where emperors juggled jade or recited Confucian poetry. The mandate of heaven was a clever way to justify why one family got to hang out in luxurious palaces while others toiled in rice paddies or manned the Great Wall. It was like saying, "I'm king because the universe said so," which is a pretty airtight argument if you ask me. The beauty, or the madness, of this system was its flexibility. A ruler could keep the mandate as long as things were going well. Crop failure, natural disaster, rebellion, the heavens must be displeased, and it was time for a new dynasty. It was a cosmic game of musical chairs, but with a lot more at stake than missing a seat. The emperors, of course, milked this for all it was worth. They were like the ultimate influencers of their era, using grandiose titles and elaborate ceremonies to remind everyone of their celestial status. They even built extravagant palaces and tombs, like the famous terracotta army of Qin Shi Huang, to underscore their divine connection. The scale of these projects was mind-boggling. The terracotta army alone, with its 8,000 soldiers, 130 chariots, and 670 horses, wasn't just a burial accessory. It was a statement piece, a way of saying, even in death, I'm a big deal. But let's not kid ourselves. Just like modern celebrities have entourages and PR teams, emperors had their ministers and eunuchs, the latter being a group of men who gave up a lot, literally, to be close to power. These guys were the gatekeepers, the behind-the-scenes puppeteers who could make or break an emperor's reputation. And much like today's spin doctors, they were adept at crafting narratives that kept the emperor in the good graces of both heaven and earth. So, while the emperors were living it up, playing the part of semi-divine beings, the reality on the ground was often less glamorous. For the average farmer or laborer, life was a grind. They were the ones who paid the real price for an emperor's ambitions, with their taxes funding grandiose projects and their sons conscripted into armies or labor gangs. The Great Wall, for instance, wasn't just a wall. It was a massive undertaking that cost untold lives and resources. Yet, in the grand narrative spun by the court, these sacrifices were just the cost of maintaining cosmic order. But let's not get too cynical. There's a reason the myth of the emperor as a semi-divine figure held such appeal. In a world where life was often harsh and unpredictable, the idea that someone up there had a direct line to the heavens provided a sense of stability and hope. It was a comforting illusion, a celestial safety net that made the whims of fate seem less arbitrary. And so the emperors continued their reign, strutting across the stage of history with all the pomp and circumstance they could muster. They were the ultimate showmen, blending myth and reality in a way that kept them at the top of the social hierarchy. Their legacy, a mix of monumental achievements and colossal failures, still echoes through the ages, a testament to the power of narrative and the allure of divine right. In the end, the story of the emperors, is a reminder that history is as much about the stories we tell as the facts we record. It's a tale of ambition and hubris, of power and propaganda, played out on a stage as vast as the Middle Kingdom itself. And like all good stories, it invites us to question, to wonder, and perhaps to see our own world with a slightly more skeptical eye. In the grand tapestry of ancient China, while emperors strutted like the ultimate headliners, a different set of players worked tirelessly behind the scenes, ready to keep the imperial show running smoothly. Enter the scholars and officials, China's own brainy version of a rock band's roadies, but with a lot more ink-stained fingers and decidedly less groupies. These guys weren't just the bureaucratic backbone of the empire. They were also the intellectual heavyweights who kept the wheels of government turning, often armed with nothing more than a brush and a mind sharpened to a fine point by endless study. Now, let's talk about these scholars who were essentially the gatekeepers of the celestial bureaucracy. They didn't get their jobs by simply knowing the emperor's favorite dumpling recipe or having connections, though both might have helped. Instead, they had to pass the imperial examinations, a grueling series of tests that made modern-day SATs look like a pop quiz in basic arithmetic. This wasn't your average Sunday crossword puzzle. It was a marathon of memorization, philosophy, and a whole lot of Confucian ideals. These exams were introduced during the Sui dynasty in 605 AD and became the mainstay of the imperial selection process for centuries. Picture this: a young scholar, probably squinting under the dim light of an oil lamp, poring over ancient texts until his eyes blurred and his back ached. This was no mere academic exercise. It was a rite of passage, a ticket to a life of power, prestige, and potentially a comfy seat in the emperor's court. The exams covered a mind-boggling range of topics, everything from the classics of Confucianism to poetry, law, and even calligraphy. And while the odds of passing were about as favorable as winning the lottery, the prize was worth the gamble. Successful candidates became part of the ruling class, wielding influence not through swords or spears, but through their ability to draft edicts and manage state affairs. This was the civil service at its most elite, a meritocratic system that, in theory, allowed any bright young mind to climb the social ladder. In practice, however, the privilege of even preparing for these exams was often limited to those already in the upper echelons of society. After all, not every peasant could afford to send their child to study the 5 classics when there were fields to plough and mouths to feed. Yet this system was revolutionary in its own way. While Europe was still figuring out the whole feudal system, China was already setting the stage for a bureaucracy that valued brains over brawn. The scholars were the ultimate nerds of their time, and their pens were mightier than any sword. They were the ones who could shape policies, influence emperors, and even act as the moral compass of the state. In a society where martial prowess often stole the spotlight, these men proved that intelligence and diligence were just as valuable on the battlefield of governance. Of course, it wasn't all noble ideals and scholarly debates. The bureaucracy had its fair share of power struggles, corruption, and backstabbing, because where there's power, there's always someone scheming to get more of it. The exams themselves could be manipulated, with questions altered to favor certain candidates or entire exams leaked to the highest bidder. It was a system as prone to human folly as any other, proving once again that where there's a will or a bribe, there's a way. And let's not gloss over the toll it took on those striving to succeed. The pressure was immense, leading some to spend their entire lives studying for exams they might never pass. The term keju, or examination, became synonymous with a relentless pursuit that could leave a scholar worn down and socially isolated. It was a testament to the lengths people would go to for a shot at power, a chance to escape the drudgery of daily life and ascend into the ranks of those who could make a difference. Despite these challenges, the system endured, becoming a defining feature of Chinese governance. It was a testament to the belief that knowledge should guide leadership, that the pen was indeed mightier than the sword. This ideal, although often compromised, set the stage for centuries of governance where intellect played a central role in the state's affairs. Scholars and officials became the unsung heroes, the quiet architects of a society that valued wisdom as much as it did might. As we peel back the layers of this bureaucratic machine, it's clear that the story of these scholars is not just about exams and edicts. It's about the enduring power of ideas, the belief that reason and learning could shape the destiny of a nation. It's a tale as relevant today as it was then, a reminder that while emperors might have commanded the stage, it was often the quiet scribes in the background who wrote the script. And in a world that sometimes feels as chaotic as ever, that's a comforting thought, isn't it? Now, while the scholars were busy reshaping the empire with their ink-dipped quills, another group was quietly amassing power in a very different way. Let's meet the noble families and landlords of ancient China. Picture this: vast swaths of land stretching out as far as the eye could see, owned by families whose influence was as sprawling as their estates. These were the real-life monopoly players, and their game board was the Chinese countryside. But don't be fooled by the bucolic image of peaceful farms and contented peasants. This wasn't some pastoral utopia where everyone held hands and sang Cumbaya. These landowners were the power brokers of their time, wielding economic might with a ruthlessness that would make a corporate raider blush. In reality, they were the ones who turned the gears of the agricultural economy, shaping the landscape and the livelihoods of those who worked it. Let's dive into the nitty-gritty of their influence. By the Han Dynasty, which kicked off around 206 BC, a staggering amount of land was controlled by these noble families. They owned so much property that it was said they couldn't walk across their estates in a day, partly because they were too vast, but also because who wants to ruin a perfectly good silk robe trudging through mud? This land wasn't just for show. It was the backbone of China's agrarian economy, providing the rice, millet, and wheat that fed millions. Now, you might think these landlords spent their days sipping tea and writing poetry, but managing such vast estates was no small feat. It required a keen understanding of agriculture, economics, and not a small amount of political savvy. They employed armies of laborers, often organized in a sharecropping system that, let's be honest, was as stacked in their favor as a casino's slot machine. Peasants worked the land and gave a hefty share, sometimes up to 50% of their harvest to the landlords. In return, they got the privilege of staying on the land and occasionally the landlord's benevolent protection. But oh, the myth of the benevolent landlord. It's a romanticized tale that's about as accurate as a fairy tale. While some landlords were indeed fair and even generous, others were as rapacious as a pack of hungry wolves. The reality was that many peasants lived in perpetual debt, their lives a constant struggle to appease their landowner overlords while keeping their families fed. It was a harsh, unforgiving system where the scales were perpetually tipped against those who tilled the soil. The landlord's power wasn't just economic, it was deeply political. They often held local administrative roles, acting as the emperor's eyes and ears in the provinces. In some cases, their influence rivaled that of the emperor himself. They could decide who got what land, which disputes got settled, and even who was worthy of a recommendation for the imperial exams. This decentralized power structure meant that, while the emperor ruled from afar, these landlords were the ones who really called the shots on the ground. But let's not gloss over the fact that this power came with its own set of risks. These landlords were caught in a delicate balancing act, their fortunes tied to the whims of nature and the stability of the empire. A bad harvest or a political upheaval could turn a wealthy landowner into yesterday's news faster than you can say, mandate of heaven. The fall of the Han Dynasty in 220 AD, for example, saw many landed families lose everything in the chaos that ensued. Still, the allure of land and the power it conferred was irresistible. It was the ancient equivalent of owning a tech startup or a prime piece of real estate in Manhattan. The tangible wealth was undeniable, but it was the social prestige and influence that truly set these families apart. They were the tastemakers, the ones who set the trends and dictated the social norms. And yet, despite their wealth and power, these landlords were often viewed with suspicion and disdain by both the peasants who worked for them and the scholars who saw them as crude and unsophisticated. The Confucian ideal of a harmonious society didn't always jibe with the reality of landlords exploiting their tenants. The tension between the landed gentry and the intellectual elite was a recurring theme in Chinese history, a clash between two visions of what it meant to wield power. In the end, the story of these noble families and landlords is a complex one, layered with contradictions and competing narratives. It's a tale of ambition and exploitation, of power wielded and power lost. It's a reminder that history is never as simple as it seems, that the romanticized version of events often hides a harsher reality beneath. As we continue to explore the social hierarchy of ancient China, it's clear that the stage was filled with a cast of characters as diverse and dynamic as the empire itself. From emperors and scholars to landlords and peasants, each played their part in the grand drama of history, leaving behind a legacy as rich and complex as the land they inhabited. And while we might be tempted to see these stories through the lens of legend, it's the gritty, unvarnished reality that offers the most compelling insights into the human condition. As the curtain rises on the next act of our historical saga, let's shift our gaze from the opulent palaces and sprawling estates to the unsung heroes who truly kept ancient China's heart beating, the peasants and artisans. These were the folks who, while not strutting the imperial stage or penning edicts, were undoubtedly the backbone of the entire show. They were the ones who toiled under the sun, their hands stained with earth and ink, crafting the very fabric of everyday life. First, let's talk peasants. Now, if you're picturing idyllic scenes of pastoral bliss, where happy farmers skip through fields of golden rice, think again. Life for a peasant in ancient China was anything but a pastoral painting. It was more akin to a grueling endurance race with no finish line in sight. This was a world where the average farmer spent nearly every waking moment tending to crops, battling the whims of weather and a tax burden that could make you wince. Forget the myth of the noble peasant living in harmony with nature. Reality was much less forgiving. To understand the grit behind their lives, consider that by the Tang Dynasty, 618-907 AD, a typical male peasant worked about 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's right, weekends were an imaginary luxury. They were the human engines powering the agricultural machine that fed the empire. And feed it they did, cultivating rice, millet, and wheat that kept the population, and the tax collectors satisfied. In return, they got to keep just enough to eke out a subsistence living, if they were lucky. The economic context was brutal. Taxes could eat up to 50% of a peasant's produce, and that's before considering the free labor required for public works. When the emperor decided it was time for a new canal or a section of the Great Wall needed patching up, guess who got drafted? It wasn't the local aristocracy sipping tea on their verandas. No, it was these hardy souls, conscripted to toil under the watchful eyes of overseers. The cost of these grand imperial projects was measured in more than just silver. It was paid in sweat, blood, and often lives. But despite the hardships, or perhaps because of them, peasants demonstrated a resilience that was nothing short of astonishing. They developed ingenious agricultural techniques like crop rotation and the use of irrigation to maximize yields. Terracing hillsides and canal building became second nature, transforming inhospitable landscapes into productive farmland. In a world where the margin for error was razor-thin, innovation wasn't just appreciated, it was essential for survival. Now, while peasants were the brawn, artisans were the brains behind China's material culture. These skilled craftsmen were the ones who turned raw materials into everyday marvels. Pottery, silk, iron tools, and paper. These weren't just commodities. They were the lifeblood of a burgeoning economy. Much like today's tech innovators, artisans were constantly pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Take the Han Dynasty's silk production, for instance. By 200 AD, China had perfected the art of sericulture, and silk became a hot commodity, traded along the Silk Road to places as far-flung as Rome. It was said that a Roman senator could be spotted a mile away, draped in Chinese silk. The artisans behind this luxury item were masters of their craft, spinning threads so fine and fabrics so lustrous that they could make even the most hardened Roman legionary weep with envy. Iron smelting was another area where Chinese artisans excelled. By the 5th century BC, they had developed techniques to produce cast iron, centuries before Europe would catch up. This was no small feat. It was a game-changer that transformed agriculture and warfare alike. A well-made iron plow could turn rocky soil into fertile fields, while iron swords and armor gave Chinese warriors a formidable edge on the battlefield. Yet, despite their contributions, artisans were often seen as little more than glorified laborers. Confucian ideals prized scholars and farmers, viewing artisans and merchants with a degree of suspicion. After all, they were the ones profiting from others' hard work, or so the thinking went. The reality, of course, was that without these skilled craftsmen, the empire would grind to a halt faster than you can say Great Wall. The artisan's ability to adapt and innovate was crucial in a society that was in a constant state of flux. Political upheavals, natural disasters, and shifting trade routes all demanded flexibility and ingenuity. Whether it was developing new techniques to dye silk or improving kiln technology for pottery, artisans rose to the challenge time and again. They were the quiet innovators, the unsung architects of a civilization whose material culture was as sophisticated as its philosophical thought. As we peel back the layers of this complex social hierarchy, it's clear that peasants and artisans were far more than just background players in the grand drama of ancient China. They were the engine and the artisans of empire, shaping a society that, for all its sophistication, was as dependent on the labor of the many as it was on the vision of the few. Their stories, though often overshadowed by those of emperors and scholars, offer a compelling glimpse into the resilience and ingenuity that defined an era. In the next chapter of our journey, we'll delve deeper into the lives of these everyday heroes, exploring not just their struggles, but also the subtle ways in which they influenced the course of history. After all, as much as emperors might have commanded the stage, it was the peasants and artisans who kept the lights on and the show running. Stay tuned, because the story of ancient China's unsung heroes is far from over. As we bid farewell to the relentless toil of peasants and the quiet genius of artisans, let's turn our gaze to the often overlooked underdogs of the ancient Chinese social hierarchy, the merchants. Here's a group that managed to pull off a curious balancing act, amassing wealth while being viewed with the kind of suspicion usually reserved for a snake oil salesman at a health convention. They were the folks who kept the economy ticking, yet were somehow always seated at the kids' table when it came to social respectability. In a society that revered scholars and farmers as paragons of virtue, merchants were seen as, well, a necessary evil. They were the ones who moved goods from point A to point B, connecting the vast stretches of the empire with a network of trade routes that would make a modern-day logistics manager break out in a sweat. Despite their essential role, they were often accused of being greedy, shifty, and worst of all, contributing nothing of tangible value. Why, you ask? Because unlike farmers who toiled for their harvest and scholars who labored over texts, merchants made money by buying low and selling high, a practice that, to the Confucian moralists, smacked of opportunism rather than honest work. Yet, for all the disdain, merchants were far from the hapless villains in this historical narrative. They were savvy operators, navigating a rigid social system with the finesse of a chess grandmaster. Let's not forget that by the Tang dynasty, around the 8th century AD, China was at the heart of the Silk Road, a bustling trade network that stretched from the Far East to the Mediterranean. Chinese merchants, with their caravans laden with silk, porcelain, and spices, were the original globetrotters, setting up shop in exotic locales and returning with stories and goods that fueled the empire's economy. And it wasn't just overland opportunities they seized. The maritime Silk Road saw China's merchants riding the waves to places like India, Arabia, and even East Africa. Imagine the value of porcelain and silk in those distant markets. These traders were like medieval venture capitalists, risking it all on long voyages that could end in either fortune or misfortune. But when it paid off, it paid off big time. Some merchants amassed fortunes that could rival a duke's dowry, if not outright dwarf it. But here's where it gets interesting. Despite their wealth, merchants found themselves locked in a paradox. They could buy influence, sure, but they couldn't buy respect. In the eyes of the Confucian elite, wealth acquired through commerce was suspect at best, corrupting at worst. It didn't really help that some merchants lived up to the stereotype, engaging in practices like hoarding goods to inflate prices or watering down wine to stretch their profits. But hey, who hasn't driven past a gas station during a fuel crisis and thought, history repeats itself? Even as they were shunned socially, merchants were too crucial to be entirely dismissed. They were like the black sheep of the family who also happened to be the breadwinner. Their ability to facilitate trade, and by extension, tax revenue, was indispensable. Many a dynasty realized that, while they could afford to look down on merchants, they couldn't afford to lose them. The Song dynasty, for instance, which reigned from 960 to 1279 AD, leveraged the merchant class to such an extent that it saw an economic boom, with urban centers flourishing like never before. What's fascinating is how this historical conundrum challenges the very notion of social mobility. In theory, wealth should have been a ticket out of the lower echelons of society. In reality, it was more like a golden cage. Merchants found themselves in a curious limbo, rich enough to wield economic influence, yet perpetually barred from the corridors of true power and prestige, which were reserved for those who passed the imperial exams or owned vast tracts of land. And yet, the legacy of these merchants is hard to overlook. They were the unwitting architects of globalization, laying down the economic foundations that would eventually support the colossal weight of future empires. As trade expanded, so did the exchange of ideas, technology, and culture. The compass, gunpowder, and paper-making, all innovations that would change the world, spread as much through trade routes as through scholarly discourse. So, what does this tell us about the echoes of ancient China's social hierarchy in our modern world? Quite a bit, actually. Today, we still grapple with the paradox of valuing certain types of work over others, of conflating wealth with virtue, or lack thereof. We see it in the way tech moguls are both idolized and criticized, in debates over the value of entrepreneurs versus educators, and in the persistent tension between Wall Street and Main Street. In the end, the story of ancient China's merchants serves as a mirror, reflecting not just the values of a bygone era, but also our own. Their legacy challenges us to reconsider what we value in society and why. It invites us to question whether our own hierarchies are as immutable as they seem, or if, like the merchants of old, we too can navigate the complexities of social mobility with a bit of savvy and a lot of tenacity. As we close the chapter on ancient China's social hierarchy, it's clear that history is not just a series of events, but a tapestry of human experiences, woven together by the choices and challenges of those who came before us. From emperors to merchants, each thread tells a story of ambition, resilience, and the complex interplay of power and purpose. And while we may not always see our own lives in the grand narratives of history, these stories offer us a lens through which to understand our world a little better, one shrewd merchant at a time. In the grand tapestry of history, the kingdom of Mali stands out like a glittering thread spun from gold, and not just metaphorically. This medieval West African powerhouse was dripping in wealth, thanks to its strategic location and savvy leadership. But before we dive into the juicy details of how this empire became the medieval version of a Fortune 500 company, let's talk geography and a man named Sundiata Keita, the empire's founding rock star. First, Mali's real estate was every empire's dream. Nestled in the Sahel region, with the Sahara Desert to the north and the lush forests and rivers to the south. Think of it as prime location, location, location. The empire spanned modern-day Mali, Senegal, Gambia, and Guinea, forming a bridge between the Arab North Africa and sub-Saharan regions. It was like owning a toll booth on the only highway connecting two bustling cities. Trade routes crisscrossed the empire, carrying gold, salt, and other goods that would make any modern logistics company green with envy. These routes were the lifeblood of Mali's economy, and they were guarded with the kind of vigilance you'd expect from a dragon guarding its treasure. Now, before Mali was an empire, it was a collection of small kingdoms, each minding its own business, until Sundiata Keita arrived like a historical game-changer. Known as the Lion King of Mali, long before Disney got in on the act, Sundiata's legend is a mix of myth and reality. Think Arthurian tales, but with more sun and less drizzle. Born in 1217, he was initially dismissed as unlikely to succeed due to a physical disability, which, let's face it, is a classic underdog setup. After overcoming adversity, including a power-hungry stepmother straight out of a medieval soap opera, Sundiata united the tribes under his leadership, laying the groundwork for the Mali Empire in the 1230. Sundiata's rise was not just a personal victory, but a masterclass in political strategy. He knew that uniting the fractious kingdoms meant more than military might. It required savvy diplomacy. By 1235, at the Battle of Carina, Sundiata dealt a decisive blow to the rival Sarso kingdom, effectively saying, "Checkmate." This victory marked the beginning of Mali's golden age, quite literally. With the Sarso out of the way, Sundiata's empire expanded to control the gold-producing regions of Bambuk and Bure. To put it in perspective, during the height of Mali's power, it is estimated that the region produced nearly 2/3 of the world's gold. That's right, 2/3. Enough to make even the greediest of medieval kings envious. What made Mali a medieval superpower wasn't just the gold itself, but the empire's ability to control and capitalize on it. Sundiata established a system that was both efficient and, dare we say, ahead of its time. Trade caravans, those camel-driven juggernauts of commerce, moved goods across the empire, connecting with North African merchants who were more interested in salt than gold. Yes, salt, because when it came to preserving food, salt was the real MVP of the medieval pantry. But let's not sugarcoat it. The romantic tales of Mali's wealth often gloss over the harsh realities. The trade that enriched Mali also involved the exchange of human lives. Slavery was part of the economic fabric, a brutal truth of many historical empires. Yet, while the legend of Mali is one of gold and grandeur, it's essential to remember that wealth often came at a human cost. Sundiata's genius wasn't just in military conquests or economic savvy, but also in laying down a social structure that would keep the empire ticking long after he was gone. He established a code of laws, known as the Kurukan Fuga, that, among other things, stressed social harmony and justice, looking a lot more progressive than some modern systems. This code helped to weave a social fabric that held the diverse peoples of Mali together, ensuring that the empire didn't just grow, but thrive. As we wrap up this first chapter in the saga of Mali, remember that this empire wasn't just about gold and trade routes. It was about the art of leadership, the strategic use of geography, and the indomitable spirit of a man who turned the improbable into reality. Sundiata Keita set the stage for one of history's most vibrant empires, proving that with the right mix of grit, gold, and a bit of guile, you could go from zero to hero, medieval style. Stay tuned, because the story of Mali is far from over, and it only gets more intriguing from here. Now, let's get to the juicy heart of the matter, the economic engine that kept Mali humming like a well-oiled medieval machine. Picture this, an empire so flush with gold that it practically glittered in the sun. Mali was the bling of the medieval world, and we're not talking about some cheap knockoff. We're talking about serious wealth, the kind that could make Scrooge McDuck's vault look like a piggy bank. At the height of its power, Mali accounted for nearly 2/3 of the world's gold production. That's right, 2/3. Imagine if every gold ring, coin, or goblet you could think of had its origins in what is now West Africa. But here's the twist. Gold might have been Mali's calling card, but it was the salt trade that kept the empire's heart beating. You might be scratching your head at that one. Why salt? Well, in a time before refrigeration, salt was the MVP of preservation. It was like the Tupperware of the ancient world, essential for keeping food fresh and edible. Salt was so valuable that it was sometimes even traded ounce for ounce with gold. And Mali, strategically perched between the Saharan salt mines of Taghaza and the gold fields of Bambuk, was like the medieval version of a Wall Street broker. It profited handsomely as the middleman in this lucrative trade. Now, let's talk distribution. Who got the lion's share of this glittering wealth? Spoiler alert, not everyone. The wealth pyramid was steep, with Mansa Musa, Mali's most famous ruler, perched comfortably at the top. Mansa Musa, who reigned from 1312 to 1337, was the Jeff Bezos of the medieval world, minus the spaceship. His net worth was so astronomical that he makes modern billionaires look like small change. During his famous pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324, Mansa Musa reportedly spent so much gold in Cairo that he caused inflation. Imagine being so rich that your vacation spending throws an entire economy out of whack. But while Mansa Musa was swimming in riches, the average Malian citizen wasn't exactly rolling in dough. The empire's wealth was concentrated in the hands of rulers and the elite. The social structure was a classic pyramid scheme, with the emperor and his court enjoying the spoils while the workers, traders, artisans, and farmers kept the engine running. Slavery, an uncomfortable reality often glossed over in the romantic retellings, was an integral part of Mali's economy. Slaves were not just laborers. They were also traded as commodities. This brutal truth underscores that, while the legend of Mali is one of gold and grandeur, It's also a story of human exploitation and inequality. Despite these social disparities, Mali's wealth was legendary, and it didn't take long for the empire to become a household name across the known world. Mali made its mark not just through gold, but through its reputation as a center of learning and culture. The city of Timbuktu, for instance, became synonymous with intellectual pursuit, housing one of the largest libraries in the world at the time. Scholars flocked to the city like moths to a flame, drawn by its renowned universities and the promise of knowledge. So while Mali was a heavyweight in the economic arena, it was also a beacon of culture and education. And speaking of international name-dropping, Mansa Musa's pilgrimage didn't just leave a trail of gold dust. It put Mali on the map, quite literally. European mapmakers, who had previously been blissfully unaware of Mali's existence, began to depict the empire on their maps. Suddenly, Mali wasn't just a vague notion beyond the Sahara. It was a land of immense wealth and opportunity. This newfound fame was a double-edged sword, though. With great wealth came great interest from other powers, both near and far, who were eager to get a piece of the golden pie. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. This is just the beginning of Mali's story, and there's plenty more intrigue and drama to come. The empire's golden age was a complex tapestry woven from threads of wealth, power, and culture, but also marred by inequality and exploitation. As we delve deeper into Mali's history, we'll uncover more layers of this fascinating tale, exploring how an empire built on gold and salt managed to leave an indelible mark on history. Stay tuned, because the plot is only going to thicken from here. So, where were we? Ah, yes, Mali, the medieval wonderland where gold was as common as gossip at a royal court. But let's take a detour from the glittering riches and talk about the people who made this empire tick, from the emperor all the way down to the unsung heroes, because Mali was more than just a treasure chest. It was a living, breathing society with its unique quirks. First up, let's put the spotlight on the emperor, or as he was known, the Mansa. Now, if you're picturing an all-powerful ruler with the final say in everything from taxes to tea parties, think again. The Mansa was more like a top chess player in a very competitive game, where every move could make or break the kingdom. Sure, the Mansa sat at the peak of the social pyramid, but his power was anything but absolute. Picture a medieval CEO juggling board members, shareholders, and a never-ending stream of emails. Real power of the Mansa lay in his ability to manage a sprawling empire with diverse cultures and interests. It was about balancing acts, alliances, and sometimes a little bit of charm. Beneath the Mansa was a layer of nobles and governors who were essentially the empire's middle managers. They were tasked with the day-to-day running of the empire's vast territories, collecting taxes, enforcing laws, and of course, keeping an eye out for any signs of rebellion. These guys were crucial, acting as the glue that held the empire together. But let's not kid ourselves. They weren't doing it out of the goodness of their hearts. Power and wealth were mighty motivators, and these nobles had a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. Now, let's talk about the real MVPs, the Griots. These were the storytellers, historians, and walking Wikipedias of the medieval world. They weren't just entertainers. They were the keepers of history, the ones who passed down the stories of Sundiata Keita and other legends that shaped the empire's identity. Imagine a combination of a rock star, journalist, and librarian. Griots wielded influence not through wealth or military might, but through the power of the spoken word. Their tales could inspire or incite, depending on the narrative they chose to spin. In a world without written records, Griots were the guardians of knowledge, and their influence was nothing short of profound. But wait, there's more. The scholars and merchants played their parts in this grand social hierarchy. Timbuktu and Jen were the intellectual hotspots of the empire, where scholars from across the Islamic world gathered to study and debate. These scholars were the intellectual elite, and their influence stretched far beyond the walls of their universities. Meanwhile, merchants were the jet-setters of their time, traveling across vast distances to trade goods and ideas. They were the ones who connected Mali with the broader world, ensuring that the empire was never isolated from global trends. While the top tier of society busied themselves with power games and intellectual pursuits, the majority of Mali's population was made up of farmers, artisans, and yes, slaves. These were the folks who kept the empire's economy humming along. Farmers grew the millet and rice that fed the empire, while artisans crafted the goods that were traded for gold and salt. But it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. For many, especially the slaves, life was a struggle. Slavery was a harsh reality, with human lives treated as commodities to be bought and sold. It's a brutal truth that undercuts the romantic tales of Mali's grandeur. Now, let's tackle some myths head-on. The idea that the Mansa ruled with unchecked authority is as fictional as a medieval soap opera. The truth is, governing an empire the size of Mali required consensus and compromise. The Mansa relied on a network of advisors, religious leaders, and regional governors to make decisions. It was a team effort, more like a medieval board meeting than a royal decree. And while the Mansa was the face of the empire, the real power often lay in the hands of those who could influence him, be it a persuasive advisor or a cunning noble. As we peel back the layers of Mali's social structure, it's clear that the empire was a complex web of relationships and power dynamics. It was a society where influence was often more valuable than gold, a place where the ability to tell a compelling story could be as important as military might. The empire's strength lay in its diversity, both in its people and in its ideas. The social fabric of Mali was woven from threads of tradition, trade, and intellectual pursuit, creating a tapestry as rich and varied as the land itself. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. As we dive deeper into the saga of Mali, we'll discover more about the challenges and triumphs of this remarkable empire. From the bustling markets of Timbuktu to the corridors of power in Naini, the story of Mali is far from over, and the plot is only going to get thicker. So, buckle up and stay tuned for more tales of gold, glory, and the gritty reality that lay beneath the glittering surface of one of history's most fascinating empires. Now that we've sunk our teeth into the social structure of Mali, let's swivel our spotlight to the empire's political circus, a place where alliances were forged not by the clink of glasses, but often by the clink of wedding rings. In Mali, diplomacy wasn't about sending fruit baskets or heartfelt letters. No, it was about strategic marriages that could put any reality TV matchmaking show to shame. These unions were more than just family affairs. They were the lifeblood of political strategy, binding tribes and regions tighter than a medieval corset. Take the royal family, for instance. Their marriage alliances were like playing a high-stakes game of chess, with each move calculated to consolidate power and neutralize potential threats. The Mansas, like savvy CEOs, knew that expanding the empire wasn't just about swordplay. It was about creating a network of allies. Think of it as an intricate web of in-laws, each with a vested interest in keeping peace. These unions ensured that neighboring tribes stayed friendly, or at least not openly hostile. After all, nothing says, let's avoid war, quite like being related by marriage. But let's not gloss over the fact that these strategic marriages were often less about romance and more about realpolitik. Sure, the stories of love-struck royals make for great bedtime tales, but the reality was more Machiavellian. The Mansas and their nobles married off sons and daughters like chess pieces, each move designed to secure a political advantage, cement an alliance, or even claim new territories. These were not so much weddings as they were peace treaties, sealed with a kiss. This web of alliances extended beyond the empire's borders. Mali's rulers knew that maintaining good relations with neighboring states was key to stability. Enter the art of gift-giving, medieval style. Forget about the family heirloom or a nice bottle of wine. We're talking gold, ivory, and even slaves as diplomatic presents. These were the kinds of gifts that could sway a rival's loyalty or keep a potential invader at bay. Mali's diplomatic toolbox was rich and varied, combining strategic marriages with generous gifts to ensure the empire remained on friendly, or at least non-hostile, terms with its neighbors. But it wasn't all alliances and nuptials. Rivalries simmered under the surface, as they do in any society. The Mansa's court was a hotbed of intrigue, where nobles jostled for influence and power like contestants on a game show. The stakes were high, and the players were masters of the medieval political game. These rivalries could make or break careers, with fortunes and reputations hanging in the balance. Just like today's political arenas, the court of Mali was a place where allegiances could shift as quickly as the desert sands. Now, let's pivot to another cornerstone of Mali's political landscape, its legal system. Picture this. Justice, medieval style. The empire's legal framework was a tapestry woven from the threads of Islamic law and traditional African customs. It was here that the Quirky Fuga, a constitution of sorts, came into play. This code was promulgated by Sundiata Keita himself, and it laid down the law, literally. It wasn't just a list of do's and don'ts. It was a blueprint for social harmony, emphasizing the importance of community and justice. The Quirky Fuga covered everything from property rights to personal conduct, and it was surprisingly progressive for its time. Think of it as a medieval guide to good governance, with a focus on fairness and equity. The code even included provisions for environmental conservation, mandating the protection of trees and water sources. Not bad for the 13th century, right? It was a legal system that sought to balance the scales, ensuring that even the most powerful weren't above the law, at least in theory. But let's not romanticize it too much. The application of justice in Mali was not always a smooth ride. Like any legal system, it had its flaws and inconsistencies. The powerful often found ways to bend the rules, while the less fortunate could find themselves at the sharp end of a quick verdict. Justice, while a noble ideal, was sometimes more of a moving target than a fixed principle. It was a system that reflected the complexities of a diverse empire, trying to maintain order while grappling with the realities of power dynamics and human nature. Mali's legal framework was a fascinating blend of tradition and innovation, a testament to the empire's ability to adapt and evolve. It was a system that sought to keep the peace, even as internal and external pressures threatened to upset the balance. From strategic marriages to a legal code that emphasized justice and equity, the political landscape of Mali was as complex and multifaceted as the empire itself. And yet, for all its intricacies, it was a system that worked, at least for a time, allowing Mali to flourish as one of the most powerful and influential empires of the medieval world. As we close this chapter on Mali's political maneuvers and medieval justice, remember that this is just one part of the grand tapestry that is Mali's history. The empire's story is far from over, with more layers to uncover and more tales to tell. From the bustling courts of the Mansa to the far reaches of the empire's borders, Mali's legacy is a rich and enduring one, filled with lessons and legends that continue to captivate and inspire. Stay tuned, because the saga of Mali is only going to get more intriguing from here. As we wrap up our jaunt through the courts and codes of medieval Mali, it's time to slide over to a topic as rich and varied as the empire itself: culture and religion. Now, it's easy to think of Mali as just a gold-drenched powerhouse, but that would be like describing New York City as merely a place with tall buildings. Sure, it's true, but you're missing the real magic. You see, Mali wasn't just a center of wealth. It was a beacon of culture and learning. Let's kick things off with Timbuktu. Yes, the city that's become shorthand for the middle of nowhere in pop culture. But back in the day, Timbuktu was the Harvard and Oxford of Africa rolled into one. We're talking libraries packed with manuscripts on everything from mathematics to astronomy. At its peak, the city boasted around 25,000 students, which might not sound like much today, but back then, it was like a medieval Coachella for scholars. And speaking of scholars, Mali was a melting pot of intellectual exchange. With the empire's rise, Timbuktu attracted thinkers from across the Islamic world. We're talking about a cultural exchange that would make any modern-day study abroad program look like a weekend getaway. These scholars weren't just discussing the latest philosophical trends. They were laying down the intellectual foundations that would influence generations. But this cultural zenith wasn't just about book smarts. Mali celebrated its artistic flair through music, oral traditions, and architecture. Picture the Great Mosque of Djenné. Constructed from mud bricks and wooden beams, it's an architectural marvel that still stands today. It's like Mali looked at the desert and said, "Yeah, we'll build a masterpiece right here, thanks." And let's not forget the Griots, those charismatic storytellers who were the original influencers, shaping public opinion long before Twitter. Now, let's talk religion. Mali's spiritual landscape was as layered as a millfuel pastry. Islam was the empire's official religion, thanks in part to Mansa Musa, whose famous pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324 wasn't just a spiritual journey, but a PR masterstroke. He returned laden with Islamic texts and scholars, further embedding the religion in Mali's cultural DNA. But Islam in Mali wasn't a one-size-fits-all affair. It mingled with traditional African beliefs, creating a unique blend that was as much about ancestor worship and local customs as it was about the Quran. Yet, while Mali was a cultural juggernaut, it wasn't immune to the creeping shadows of decline. Like a blockbuster franchise that starts to lose its grip on the audience, Mali's golden age began to show cracks. By the late 14th century, internal squabbles and succession crises started to chip away at the empire's stability. The wealth that once glued the empire together now became a source of contention. And then, like any gripping drama, external threats wove their way into the narrative. In the late 15th century, the Songhai Empire, once a vassal state, rose to prominence by saying, "Move over, Mali, there's a new kid on the block." The Songhai conquest of Timbuktu in 1468 was like the medieval version of a hostile corporate takeover. Suddenly, Mali's grip on its territories began to slip, and its influence waned. But here's the kicker. Mali's decline didn't erase its legacy. In a twist worthy of a classic underdog story, the empire's cultural and intellectual contributions outlived its political might. The manuscripts of Timbuktu became legendary, surviving wars and time like literary time capsules. Even today, these texts are considered treasures of human knowledge, a testament to Mali's enduring influence. And Mali's legacy isn't just confined to dusty tomes and ancient ruins. From contemporary music that echoes the rhythms of the griots to the architectural homages in modern buildings, Mali's cultural fingerprints are everywhere. Even Mansa Musa's legendary wealth gets a nod in pop culture, serving as a reminder of a time when gold flowed like water. So, as we draw the curtain on Mali's grand saga, what's the takeaway? Well, if history has a lesson, it's this. Empires rise and fall, but culture and ideas have a staying power that even gold can't buy. Mali, with its blend of wealth, wisdom, and wonder, is a testament to the power of legacy. It's a reminder that the real treasures aren't the ones you can hold in your hand, but the ones that linger in the mind and spirit long after the last empire has fallen. And there you have it, Mali in all its glory and grit. From the bustling markets of Timbuktu to the halls of learning, from the Mansa's court to the Griots' tales, this empire left a mark that's still felt today. It's a story of triumph, decline, and enduring influence, a tale as rich and complex as the empire itself. So, next time you hear a whisper of Mali's golden age, remember that its true wealth was never just about gold. It was about the legacy that continues to inspire and captivate even now. The ancient Greeks had a knack for turning limestone and marble into political manifestos. Seriously, when they weren't busy inventing Western philosophy or staging epic dramas, they were putting up some of the most jaw-dropping buildings the world has ever seen. You might think of Greek architecture as a parade of columns and pediments, but underneath all that stone was a world of ambition, innovation, and let's be honest, more than a little bit of swagger. Let's kick things off with a dose of humility. The Greeks didn't start with the Acropolis. Their architectural journey began with the simplest of structures, like the Megaron, a rectangular hall that makes your average suburban bungalow look like Versailles. But the Greeks had something up their tunics, a vision. From these humble beginnings, they crafted an architectural language that would echo through the ages. By the 5th century BCE, Greek architecture had matured into a symphony of form and function. Enter the temples and theaters, the rock stars of Greek building. The temples weren't just places of worship, they were political statements wrapped in columns. The Parthenon, perched on the Athenian Acropolis, wasn't just a temple, it was Athens shouting to the world, "Look at us, we are the pinnacle of civilization." Finished in 438 BCE, this architectural masterpiece was the brainchild of Ictinos and Callicrates, the dynamic duo of ancient architecture. Imagine Batman and Robin, but with chisels instead of gadgets. Now, let's talk tools. Forget about power drills and cranes. These artisans were working with bronze chisels, wooden mallets, and a whole lot of manpower. Marble, the diva of building materials, was their stone of choice, and it was quarried with a precision that would put modern construction to shame. Ever tried shifting a 10-ton block of marble without hydraulics? Neither have I, but the Greeks did it with nothing more than sheer determination and some seriously clever engineering. Of course, all this architectural brilliance didn't come cheap. The construction of the Parthenon alone cost around 469 silver talents, equivalent to millions in today's currency. But why let a little thing like a budget stand in the way of glory? The Athenians knew that their temples were more than just buildings. They were investments in power and prestige. But here's the kicker. Greek architecture wasn't just about aesthetics or spiritual devotion. It was deeply intertwined with politics. Temples were often financed by war spoils, and their construction was as much about flaunting victory as it was about honoring the gods. A temple was a city's resume carved in stone, a showcase of its wealth and power. And then there were the theaters. These were social arenas where politics, art, and civic life intersected. The theater of Dionysus in Athens could hold up to 17,000 spectators, each one ready to be wooed by the latest tragedy or comedy. It's like a Netflix binge, but live, and with more toga action. The Greeks understood that architecture was more than just functional. It was a stage upon which the drama of human existence played out. Now, let's debunk a myth or two. The image of the pristine white marble temple is as much of a fantasy as Zeus himself. In reality, these structures were often painted in vibrant colors, a fact that would surprise anyone who's ever marveled at the austere elegance of Greek ruins. And those statues, they were painted too, with hues that would make a rainbow blush. The Greeks also had a flair for innovation. The Corinthian column, for instance, was the architectural equivalent of a show-off. With its ornate, acanthus leaf capitals, it was the kind of column that screamed, "Look at me." Meanwhile, the simpler Doric and Ionic columns were more like the reliable support acts, essential yet understated. But why did any of this matter? Because Greek architecture was the blueprint for Western civilization's aesthetic values. Every courthouse with a columned facade, every museum with a pedimented roof, owes a debt to those ancient builders. The Greeks carved their ideals in stone, and in doing so, they laid the foundations for what we now call the classical tradition. So, what's the takeaway here? Greek architecture was more than just a collection of pretty buildings. It was a testament to human ambition, a canvas for political power, and occasionally a splash of pure Greek bravado. It's a reminder that even in the ancient world, architecture was as much about making a statement as it was about providing shelter. And let's be real, if you're going to make a statement, you might as well do it in marble. And speaking of making a statement, let's dive into the architectural equivalent of a fashion magazine, the styles of Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian columns. You see, the ancient Greeks didn't just slap up any old pillar and call it a day. Oh no, they were connoisseurs of column couture, each style with its own flair and backstory. So let's break it down, like a good DJ at a toga party. First up, the Doric column. Imagine it as the no-nonsense, stripped-down version of a column, like a pair of classic levies. It's the oldest of the three styles, dating back to the 7th century BCE, and it's about as Spartan as they come, no pun intended. With its sturdy, fluted shaft and simple, saucer-like capital, the Doric column was the architectural embodiment of less is more. It was economical, practical, and built to withstand the test of time, much like your favorite pair of jeans. But don't let its simplicity fool you. It was also a statement of strength and masculinity, a fitting choice for temples dedicated to male gods like Zeus and Apollo. The Parthenon itself is a Doric masterpiece, proving that sometimes even the most powerful cities in the world prefer their architecture to be straightforward and bold. Next, we have the Ionic column, which is where things start to get a bit fancy. Think of the Ionic as the column equivalent of a tailored suit, complete with a snazzy tie. Originating in the 6th century BCE, the Ionic style is all about elegance and proportion. Its most distinctive feature, the volutes, or scroll-like ornaments that adorn its capital. These spirals were inspired by the Nautilus shell, and they give the column a sense of movement and grace. The Ionic column stands on a base, unlike its Doric cousin, which adds to its refined appearance. It's a bit like adding a pair of polished dress shoes to your outfit. The Erechtheion on the Acropolis is a prime example of Ionic architecture, with its columns looking more like they've just stepped out of a Greek fashion show than a construction site. Finally, we arrive at the Corinthian column, the architectural equivalent of a peacock strutting its stuff. This style came into vogue in the late 5th century BCE and is the most ornate of the three. If you ever wanted to see a column that could double as a work of art, this is it. The Corinthian capital is a riot of acanthus leaves, and sometimes even flowers, making it the perfect choice for structures that wanted to show off a bit. This column isn't just about aesthetics. It's about making sure everyone knows you're the fanciest temple on the block. The Temple of Olympian Zeus in Athens is a Corinthian showstopper, a testament to the fact that sometimes more really is more. But let's be honest, the Corinthian style didn't reach its full potential until the Romans got their hands on it and took it to new, luxurious heights. Now, let's put these styles into the social context of ancient Greece. The myth that the Greeks were all about grandiosity can be debunked right here. Sure, they built monumental structures, but often it was less about opulence and more about keeping up with the Spartans, or whichever rival city-state was flexing its architectural muscles at the time. Building a grand temple wasn't just an exercise in hubris. It was a political move, a way of saying, we've got the resources, the manpower, and the divine favor. What do you have? Of course, none of this was cheap. Constructing these temples required significant economic investment and labor. Let's talk numbers. A temple like the Parthenon wasn't just a couple of stones piled up like a game of Jenga. It required hundreds of skilled laborers, from architects like Ictinos and Callicrates to stone masons, woodworkers, and artists. The cost was astronomical, often running into hundreds of silver talents, a currency that still makes modern economists raise an eyebrow. And who was footing the bill? Often, these projects were funded by war spoils or public taxes, which meant the people of the city-state were quite literally invested in these structures. It was public art on a grand scale, and came with its own set of controversies. Imagine a modern taxpayers' meeting, but with more toga-clad councilmen and fewer PowerPoint presentations. Labor was another story. The Greeks relied heavily on both skilled artisans and a workforce that included slaves and non-citizens. These were the unsung heroes of Greek architecture, the ones who made the vision a reality. They worked tirelessly, shaping massive blocks of marble with nothing more than bronze tools and a keen eye for detail. The sheer manpower involved was staggering. We're talking about a small army of workers hauling stones that weighed as much as an SUV up steep inclines without the aid of modern machinery. It's a testament to human ingenuity and a reminder of the high cost of ancient architectural wonders. So, while the Parthenon and its brethren might have been the rock stars of ancient architecture, they were also the product of a complex web of social, economic, and political factors. They were as much about power and prestige as they were about piety and aesthetics. The Greeks didn't invent grandiosity. They perfected it as a tool for social and political leverage. And while we can admire their architectural achievements, it's worth remembering the human cost and ambition that lay beneath those marble facades. In our next installment, we'll explore how these architectural styles spread beyond Greece, influencing the wider Mediterranean world like a viral TikTok dance. But for now, let's raise a toast to the Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian columns, the true fashion icons of ancient architecture. Here's to the Greeks, who knew how to turn stone into statements and made sure their legacy would stand the test of time, literally and figuratively. Stay tuned for more ancient antics and architectural adventures, as we wave goodbye to the architectural divas of Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian columns. Let's strut into the urban jungle of ancient Greece. No, I'm not talking about a labyrinth of stone lions and mythical minotaurs, but rather the grid-savvy, agora-centric cities like Athens and Miletus. These urban centers were less about towering temples and more about the nitty-gritty logistics of human habitation. We're diving into city planning, Greek style, a complex dance of democracy, economy, and the occasional power play. Let's start with Athens, the bay and say of ancient cities, always in the spotlight and forever setting trends. Athens wasn't just about the grandiosity of the Acropolis. It was a masterclass in urban planning. At its heart was the agora, the bustling epicenter where politics, commerce, and philosophy collided in a daily free-for-all. Picture it as the original social media platform, but with fewer cat videos and more Socratic dialogues. The agora was where citizens, well, male citizens, gathered to debate, sharp, and gossip. It was democracy in action, making Athens not just a city, but a full-fledged civic experience. The genius of Athenian urban planning lay in its grid system. a design that would make any modern city planner nod in approval. Streets were laid out with mathematical precision, a feat that would shock anyone who's ever tried to navigate a medieval European town. This wasn't just about aesthetics. It was a reflection of a society that valued order, balance, and public discourse as much as it did artistic flair. But let's debunk a myth. While Athens loved to tout itself as a democratic utopia, the reality was more complex. Only about 10% of its population, the free male citizens, had a say in the decision-making process. Women, slaves, and foreigners were left out of this civic dream, which makes one question the inclusivity of this so-called cradle of democracy. Now, let's sail over to Miletus, the underappreciated sibling in the Greek family of cities. If Athens was the rock star, Miletus was the architect's muse. A city planned with such foresight it could have been drafted by a CAD program. The brainchild behind this urban marvel was Hippodamus of Miletus, the grandfather of city planning. Known for his grid pattern design, Hippodamus' influence stretched far beyond the Aegean. His approach was all about symmetry, order, and let's be honest, a touch of OCD. Miletus was divided into rational blocks, with public spaces strategically placed to facilitate trade, discussion, and the occasional philosophical rant. Economically, these cities were no slouches either. Athens, for instance, leveraged its prime location and naval prowess to dominate trade in the Mediterranean. The Piraeus, its bustling port, was a hive of activity, where everything from olive oil to luxury goods changed hands. This economic engine fueled the city's cultural and political ambitions, proving that behind every grand temple was a robust trade network. But let's not get too starry-eyed here. Athens' prosperity was built on the backs of its silver mines at Laurium, where slaves toiled in conditions that would make a Dickensian workhouse seem appealing. It was a harsh reminder that even the most enlightened societies had their dark underbellies. Miletus, on the other hand, was the tech startup of the ancient world. Located on the western coast of Anatolia, it thrived as a trade hub, connecting the Greek world with the cultures of Asia Minor. Miletus' prosperity was linked to its innovative spirit. This was the birthplace of Thales, the philosopher who predicted solar eclipses and dabbled in early geometry. The city's planning reflected its intellectual pedigree, with spaces designed to encourage public interaction and debate. Yet, like Athens, Miletus' egalitarian facade masked a reality where power was concentrated in the hands of the wealthy elite, with slaves and women relegated to the sidelines. Now, let's talk about those agoras. These weren't just open-air markets. They were the beating hearts of Greek cities. In Athens, the agora was where Socrates taught, where Pericles spoke, and where fortunes were made and lost. It was an architectural embodiment of the Greek love for public life, a place where ideas and goods were exchanged with equal fervor. But beneath this romantic image lay a web of political intrigue. The agora was a stage for power plays as much as it was for philosophical discourse. Economic strategies were hatched here, influencing everything from military campaigns to cultural patronage. And let's not forget the role of religion in these urban settings. Temples dotted the landscape, not just as places of worship, but as symbols of civic pride and political clout. The Acropolis in Athens, with its iconic Parthenon, was less about piety and more about projecting power. It was a marble manifesto, declaring Athenian supremacy in art, politics, and war. Yet, for all its grandeur, the Acropolis was also a site of economic activity, with offerings and tributes flowing in from across the Greek world, bolstering Athens' coffers. Urban planning in the Greek world was a reflection of their societal values, a blend of order, democracy, and ambition. But let's not kid ourselves into thinking it was all sunshine and olive groves. These cities were complex organisms, thriving on trade, labor, and sometimes exploitation. The romantic notion of the Greek city as a beacon of democracy and culture is tempered by the realities of its economic and social structures. As we wrap up this urban tour, it's clear that the Greeks were more than just master builders. They were master planners. Their cities were not just collections of buildings, but vibrant communities shaped by economics, politics, and human ambition. In our next installment, we will explore how these urban designs and architectural styles spread their influence across the Mediterranean, leaving a legacy as enduring as the myths they inspired. But for now, let's appreciate the Greeks for what they were, Visionaries who laid the foundations for urban life as we know it, with all its beauty, complexity, and contradictions. Stay tuned for more revelations from the ancient world, where every stone tells a story and every city has a secret. As we leave behind the bustling streets of Athens and Miletus, let's zoom in on the architectural grandstands of Greek religion and society. The temples. These weren't just holy hangouts for the gods. They were the ultimate expression of civic pride, political ambition, and let's face it, a bit of showing off. The Parthenon might be the poster child, but it was just one of many marble marvels that dotted the Greek landscape, each with its own story of ambition and rivalry. Now, before you get swept up in the romantic notion of divine inspiration, let's inject a dose of reality. These temples were less about touching the heavens and more about touching the egos of the city-states that built them. Take the Parthenon, for example. Finished in 438 BCE and costing a jaw-dropping 469 silver talents. Translate that to modern dough and you're talking millions. It wasn't just a place for Athena to hang her helmet. It was Athens' way of saying, with a bay and say of the ancient world, bow down, everyone else. Let's be clear. Building a temple was the ancient equivalent of a billion-dollar infrastructure project. It involved a small army of laborers, and not just the skilled artisans chiseling away at marble like it's a block of cheddar. We're talking about the unsung heroes, slaves and non-citizens, whose sweat and toil were as integral to these projects as the grand designs of architects like Ictinos and Callicrates. It was a massive team effort, although some team members weren't exactly there by choice. And what about the resources? Marble didn't just spring up like daisies. It had to be quarried, transported and shaped, often from miles away. The Parthenon's marble came from Mount Pentelicus, a good 16 kilometers from Athens. Imagine hauling multi-ton slabs without a single forklift in sight. It's a testament to Greek determination, or maybe just their stubbornness. But why go through all this trouble? Well, for the Greeks, a temple was a tangible manifestation of their city's wealth and power. It was architectural swagger, plain and simple. The grander the temple, the greater the city's perceived power. It was like having the tallest skyscraper on the skyline. Only this skyscraper was filled with sculptures of gods and heroes, not cubicles and corporate boardrooms. Now, let's shift focus from the Parthenon to the everyday temples that peppered the Greek world. These weren't just scaled-down versions of the Acropolis' crown jewel. They were community centers, places where the divine and the mundane met over sacrificial feasts and public assemblies. Each temple had its own patron deity, and each city was eager to impress both the gods and their neighbors with their sacred architecture. Consider the Temple of Hera at Olympia. Built around 590 BCE, it wasn't as flashy as the Parthenon, but it was significant in its own right. It stood as a testament to the early Greek penchant for architecture that was both functional and symbolic. It was here that the Greeks started to experiment with columns and pediments, setting the stage for the architectural innovations to come. Of course, these projects didn't come cheap. The financial burden of temple construction often fell on the city-state's coffers, swelled by taxes, tributes, and the occasional war loot. In many cases, a city's reputation was as much on the line as its budget. Building a temple was a high-stakes game, a gamble on civic pride and divine favor. And if the gods got a swanky new house out of it, all the better. But let's not fool ourselves into thinking this was all about religious fervor. The truth is, temple building was as much a political maneuver as it was an act of devotion. It was a way for city-states to flex their muscles, to broadcast their prosperity to any would-be rivals. The bigger and more elaborate the temple, the louder the message. We're here, we're powerful, and don't you forget it. In many ways, these temples were the social media of their day, broadcasting messages of strength, wealth, and piety across the Greek world. And much like today's influencer culture, there was an element of competition. Cities vied with each other to build the most impressive temples, each one trying to outdo the last, in a never-ending game of architectural one-upmanship. If Athena's temple was the centerpiece of Athens, then the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus was the ancient world's version of viral content, drawing visitors from far and wide to marvel at its grandeur. But behind all this marble and mortar was a harsh reality. The laborers who built these temples often worked in brutal conditions, toiling long hours for little or no reward, while the architects and patrons basked in the glory of their finished creations The workers remained in the shadows, their contributions largely unrecognized, a stark reminder that history often celebrates the visionaries while overlooking those who actually turned vision into reality. As we reflect on the role of Greek architecture in religion and society, it's clear that these structures were more than just buildings. They were statements of identity, markers of power, sometimes instruments of propaganda. The romantic notion of temples as mere houses of worship is compelling, but the reality is far more complex. These were the stages upon which the drama of human ambition played out, where cities carved their legacies in stone. So the next time you gaze upon the ruins of a Greek temple, remember, you're not just looking at a relic of the past. You're seeing the echoes of a society that understood the power of architecture to shape perception, influence politics, and cement its place in history. And while the gods might have been the intended audience, it's us, thousands of years later, who still marvel at their audacious achievements. In our next chapter, we'll examine how these architectural wonders spread their influence beyond Greece, leaving an indelible mark on the Mediterranean world and beyond. But for now, let's appreciate the Greeks for what they were, masters of stone and ambition, whose legacies continue to stand the test of time, literally and figuratively. Stay tuned for more tales from the ancient world, where every stone has a story and every temple a secret. And so, as the dust of ancient Greece settles on the marble ruins of temples and theaters, let's fast forward a couple of millennia to see how those ancient blueprints have managed to crash the modern architecture party. The Greeks, with their penchant for columns and pediments, might not have been able to keep their city-states from bickering like siblings on a long road trip, but they sure knew how to lay down an architectural legacy that united the world in stone. Take a stroll down the streets of Washington, D.C., and you'll be greeted by a parade of Greek-inspired grandeur. The U.S. Capitol, with its Corinthian columns and stately pediments, is a love letter to the Athenian ideals of democracy and order. Finished in 1800, this architectural nod to antiquity was more than just an aesthetic choice. It was a deliberate political statement. The fledgling United States wanted to position itself as the new cradle of democracy, and what better way to do that than to mimic the very stones that bore witness to Socratic debates. But it wasn't just the Americans who caught the Hellenic fever. From the British Museum in London to the Pantheon in Paris, Greek architectural motifs became the go-to style for any self-respecting institution wanting to exude an air of timeless authority. And let's not forget your local bank, standing proud with its Ionic columns, silently whispering, "Your money is safe here," just like it would have been in ancient Athens. This architectural language became shorthand for stability and permanence, a comforting nod to the past in a rapidly changing world. It's an irony not lost on historians that a civilization marked by fierce independence and internecine warfare managed to unite successive empires and nations in architectural harmony. The Greeks, who couldn't keep Sparta and Athens from larking horns, somehow laid the groundwork for a global architectural club where everyone wanted to join and no one had to fight. How's that for a legacy? Economically, the adoption of Greek styles was a savvy move. These designs were cost-effective yet grand, a ready-made solution for projecting power without breaking the treasury. The simplicity of the Doric column or the elegance of Ionic spirals didn't just carry aesthetic value. They were also practical choices in terms of materials and labor. Marble, while expensive, was a one-time investment with a timeless appeal, a classic case of spending now to save later. And let's not forget the myth-making. Greek architecture was imbued with stories and symbolism that modern architects couldn't resist. A pediment wasn't just a triangular space. It was a canvas for mythological narratives, turning buildings into storytellers. The allure of Greek mythology, with its tales of gods and heroes, lent an air of mystique and gravitas to every structure that borrowed its motifs. Who wouldn't want a bit of Olympus in their lobby? While these architectural styles were adopted with gusto, the realities behind them were often glossed over. The human cost of Greek construction, the sweat and toil of countless laborers, rarely made it into the brochures of neoclassical architects. The romantic image of noble Greeks carving civilization out of marble eclipsed the grittier truth of exploitation and human ambition. Yet, that veneer of elegance was precisely what made Greek architecture so appealing. It was a beautiful lie, one that people were more than happy to believe. So, why does it matter if your local courthouse looks like a temple? Because architecture is more than just a backdrop. It's a reflection of our values and aspirations. By co-opting Greek styles, modern societies were making a statement about their own ideals, whether it was the pursuit of democracy, the quest for knowledge, or the consolidation of power. Greek architecture became a universal language, spoken through stone and marble, across continents and centuries. As we wrap up this architectural odyssey, it's worth pondering the curious blend of myth and reality that defines Greek architecture. These structures were as much about dreaming big as they were about the nitty-gritty realities of politics and economics. They were canvases for human ambition, monuments to the gods, and sometimes massive PR campaigns for the city-states that built them. In the end, Greek architecture was a testament to the power of vision and the resilience of stone, a legacy carved in marble and ambition. So next time you pass by a building with a row of stately columns or a triangular pediment, give a nod to the ancient Greeks. Remember that behind every facade lies a story of human endeavor, a blend of myth and reality that continues to captivate our imaginations. The Greeks might have been imperfect in their politics, but when it came to architecture, they built a legacy as enduring as their myths, a testament to the enduring power of stone and story. And there you have it, the saga of Greek architecture, from the hills of Athens to the streets of modern metropolises. A journey through time, space, and stone, where every column and capital tells a tale of human ambition and ingenuity. It's a legacy that continues to shape our world, one marble block at a time. So, here's to the Greeks, the original architects of civilization, whose vision and vanity gave us a blueprint for beauty and a legacy that stands the test of time. The Neo-Assyrian Empire, the ancient world's equivalent of a high-stakes poker game, knew how to lay its cards on the table with a certain panache. Take Nimrod, for instance. This city wasn't just plopped down anywhere like some forgotten board game piece. Oh no, it was strategically planted along the banks of the Tigris River, a bit of real estate that was the envy of many a neighboring empire. Nimrod wasn't just a city, it was a statement, a kind of ancient times square, but with fewer neon lights and more ziggurats. Let's talk scale first, because it's hard not to when discussing the architectural ambition of the Neo-Assyrians. The city sprawled over 360 hectares. For those who don't measure their backyard in hectares, think of it as roughly 900 football fields. And this wasn't just a matter of stacking a few mud bricks and calling it a day. We're talking about walls thick enough to make you question whether they were keeping people out or elephants in. Some were as wide as 6 meters, about the wingspan of a Cessna. That's not just overachieving, that's setting the curve and then building a wall around it. But why go to such lengths? Why erect a metropolis that would make even the most jaded urban planner swoon? Well, the Neo-Assyrians were playing a different kind of game. It wasn't just about bricks and mortar. It was about power, prestige, and making sure your neighbors knew exactly who was top dog. Building on such a grand scale was like shouting your dominance from the rooftops, if your rooftops happened to be 100 feet high and visible from the next city over. Now, let's sprinkle in some economic motivation. Those mighty ziggurats and palaces didn't pay for themselves. The empire had the luxury of a robust taxation system that would make any modern IRS agent drool. They funneled wealth from all corners of their domain, taxing everything from grain to gold to goats. And what wasn't taxed was probably taken by force, because the Assyrians weren't exactly known for their subtlety. This was an empire that made its fortune on the backs of its vassals and the spoils of war, meaning their construction projects were often financed by someone else's misery. Politically, Nimrod served as a shiny, albeit slightly intimidating, example of imperial might. Kings like Ashurnasirpal II used it as a canvas to paint their legacy, commissioning palaces that were basically ancient press releases in stone. These kings didn't just want to live, they wanted to live in style. Ashurnasirpal II palace alone was a behemoth, covering some 12 acres and featuring walls lined with intricate bas-reliefs. Think of it as the original open concept living, with added intimidation factor. And speaking of costs, let's not glide over the human element here. The construction of such marvels demanded thousands of laborers, many of whom were prisoners of war. While these structures were undeniably impressive, It's worth noting that they were built on the sweat, and quite literally, the blood of the conquered. It's like the original version of those built Ford tough ads, but with a lot more forced labor and less country music. So, while the romantic notion of Nimrod as a gleaming jewel of ancient architecture is enticing, it's not the whole story. Behind the breathtaking facades and towering columns were political strategies and economic machinations that would make Machiavelli nod in approval. The Neo-Assyrian Empire knew that a well-placed brick could be worth 1,000 words, or at least 1,000 troops. Nimrod wasn't just a city, it was a message, one etched in stone and history, reminding everyone who dared to look that the Assyrians were playing for keeps. And speaking of cities that were more than just a collection of bricks and mortar, let's take a detour through time to Nineveh, the Neo-Assyrian Empire's crown jewel and its most ambitious urban experiment. If Nimrod was a statement, Nineveh was a full-blown manifesto. Imagine a city sprawled over 750 hectares, which is roughly 850 football fields packed together like a sardine can of ancient ambition. This wasn't just urban planning, it was urban grandstanding. Nineveh's walls were the stuff of legend, and not just because they were taller than your average 3-story building. At their peak, they stretched over 12 kilometers in length, a colossal feat of engineering that would make today's civil engineers reach for their calculators and a stiff drink. These walls weren't just about keeping out the riffraff, they were the intricate exoskeleton of a city that was flexing its architectural muscles. The Assyrians weren't subtle, and their walls were a loud and clear message: keep out, or else. But while the walls have always gotten all the glory, it was Nineveh's canal systems that were the unsung heroes of this urban epic. Picture a network of waterways snaking through the city, a veritable Venetian maze designed to quench the thirst of an estimated 100,000 residents and their crops. That's right, 100,000 souls, all vying for a sip from the same ancient straw. These canals weren't just decorative moats for the wealthy. They were vital arteries for survival. Forget about picturesque gondola rides. This was about ensuring that your morning grain didn't turn into an afternoon dust bowl. Of course, maintaining such an elaborate system was about as easy as herding cats. Canals required constant attention, and neglecting them could turn a thriving metropolis into a parched ghost town faster than you can say climate change. Not to mention, the labor force needed to keep these waterways operational was enormous. Picture thousands of workers, many of whom were likely conscripted or enslaved, shoveling dirt under the unforgiving sun, all so the city could avoid the ancient equivalent of a water bill delinquency notice. Now, let's not let the grandeur of Nineveh's infrastructure overshadow its logistical headaches. Running a city of this magnitude was like trying to spin a dozen plates while riding a unicycle on a tightrope. Even the most basic necessities, like food and sanitation, were monumental challenges. Imagine managing a citywide grocery list for 100,000 people without the luxury of modern supply chains. Spoiler alert, it wasn't pretty. Grain, the staple of ancient diets, had to be brought in from the rural hinterlands, transported by the very canals that kept the city hydrated. It was a delicate dance of logistics that modern urban planners would admire, even as they grimaced at the lack of technology. Sanitation, too, was a Herculean task. Waste management wasn't exactly top of mind for ancient urbanites, so let's just say Nineveh's streets weren't always as pristine as the history books might suggest. With such a dense population, the city was a pressure cooker of human activity, and not always the kind that smells like fresh bread. Disease was a constant specter, lurking around every corner, ready to turn the city's dense population into its own version of a petri dish. As if that weren't enough to keep the city's administrators awake at night, Nineveh was also a political and cultural melting pot. The city was a magnet for merchants, diplomats, and mercenaries from all over the known world, each bringing their own flavors to the Assyrian stew. This bustling diversity was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it made Nineveh a cosmopolitan hub, a place where ideas and goods flowed as freely as the water in its canals. On the other, it meant that political tensions simmered just beneath the surface, with factions jostling for power like contestants in an ancient reality show. Despite the challenges, the allure of Nineveh was undeniable. It was the very embodiment of the Neo-Assyrian Empire's might and sophistication, a place where grand palaces rose like phoenixes from the desert, their walls adorned with vivid reliefs depicting the empire's conquests. But behind the myth of Nineveh, as a utopian metropolis, lay the gritty realities of ancient urban life. The romantic image of a gleaming city was tempered by the smoke and dust of daily existence, a reminder that even the most legendary cities were built on the backs of ordinary people. In the end, Nineveh was both a dream and a nightmare, a place where the Assyrians reached for the stars, even as they grappled with the day-to-day messiness of keeping such a behemoth afloat. Its legacy is a testament to human ambition, a reminder that no matter how high we build our walls or how intricate our canals, we're still at the mercy of the same forces that have shaped human history for millennia. The city was a shining beacon of the Assyrian way, a testament to their engineering prowess and their unyielding drive to dominate. But it was also a living, breathing organism, fraught with all the complexities and contradictions of human life. So, as we leave Nineveh for now, let's keep in mind that while myths are fun to tell, the real stories, the ones with all their dirt and grit, are what make history truly fascinating. The next stop on our journey through the Neo-Assyrian Empire promises more discoveries, more myths to debunk, and more truths to uncover. Stay tuned as we dive deeper into the empire's architectural feats, each brick laid telling a story of power, ambition, and the relentless pursuit of glory. As we delve into the architectural innovations of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, let's step away from the towering ziggurats and take a closer look at the ground-level ingenuity that made these ancient builders the envy of their time. Sure, we've all heard about Roman arches and aqueducts, but centuries before the Romans were even a glint in the Mediterranean sun. The Assyrians were turning arches and aqueducts into an art form, and not just for aesthetic kicks. We're talking serious feats of engineering that were both symbols of power and practical problem solvers. First up, the arches. Now, we're not talking about the kind you'd find on a fast food restaurant sign. These were architectural marvels, used in everything from palatial entrances to stabilizing bridges. The Neo-Assyrians were pioneers in using true arches, which is a big deal because it allowed them to create structures that could support more weight with less material. Think of it like upgrading from a tricycle to a bicycle. Once you get the balance right, the possibilities are endless. Arches allowed for larger and more open spaces, making their palaces not only grand, but also structurally sound in the earthquake-prone regions of Mesopotamia. Take the grand entrance of the Northwest Palace in Nimrud. It was a declaration. This wasn't a simple hole in the wall, but an imposing gateway flanked by colossal statues of Lamashu, those mythical human-headed winged bulls that seemed to say, "Welcome, but tread carefully." The use of arches here didn't just serve a structural purpose. It was a psychological one. Walking through that entrance was like stepping into the pages of an epic, with the architecture serving as the prologue. But arches were just the beginning. The Neo-Assyrians also had a knack for hydrology that would make even the most seasoned water engineer blush. Enter the aqueducts. While the Romans certainly get the spotlight for their impressive aqueducts, it's time we shine some of that on their Assyrian predecessors. The aqueduct at Jerwan, for instance, built during the reign of Sennacherib around 691 BCE, was a colossal piece of engineering that stretched over 50 kilometers. This wasn't just about moving water, it was about moving it with precision and purpose. The Jerwan aqueduct was a lifeline, channeling water from the mountains to Nineveh, ensuring that the city's gardens, fields, and fountains stayed lush and vibrant. This wasn't just about keeping city dwellers hydrated, it was about displaying the king's power over nature itself. The aqueduct stood as a testament to Sennacherib's might, literally carved into the landscape, with inscriptions that read like ancient billboards proclaiming his engineering prowess. This wasn't just about keeping up appearances, it was a practical necessity. You see, Mesopotamia wasn't exactly the land of milk and honey. With unpredictable rainfall and scorching heat, managing water was akin to juggling flaming torches, impressive, but risky if you slipped up. The aqueducts were a testament to the empire's understanding that controlling water was controlling life. It was a message to friend and foe alike. Mess with us, and not only will we flood your lands, we'll also out-engineer you. In practical terms, these innovations meant that the Assyrians could support their sprawling urban centers, feeding the hungry mouths of those 100,000 Ninevites while keeping their city from turning into a dust bowl. But let's not sugarcoat it. This engineering success was often on the backs of forced labor. Those impressive aqueducts and arches weren't built by volunteers looking for a bit of exercise. They were constructed by laborers who, more often than not, were prisoners of war or conscripted workers. It was less of a public works project and more of an empire-building boot camp. Economically, these architectural feats weren't just about showing off. They were vital investments in the empire's stability. By ensuring a stable water supply and robust infrastructure, the Neo-Assyrians could better manage their agricultural output and trade routes, which in turn fueled their military campaigns and expansionist ambitions. It was a complex feedback loop where power, engineering, and economics were as intertwined as the bricks in their arches. Of course, no discussion of Neo-Assyrian architecture is complete without mentioning their temples. Steeped in religious significance, these were not just places of worship, but also demonstrations of divine favor and earthly might. The temples were often adorned with intricate carvings and reliefs, showcasing the gods' protection over the people and the king's piety, a kind of divine endorsement that would make even the most fervent modern influencer envious. These temples, like the famed Temple of Ashur, were built with the same architectural flair that marked the empire's other constructions. The use of arches and advanced masonry techniques allowed for grand halls and towering facades that rose above the cityscape as if to bridge the gap between the earth and the heavens. The temples served a dual purpose. They were places of spiritual refuge and a reminder that the king was the intermediary between the gods and the earth, a PR strategy that kept the populace awed and the priesthood on side. And while we might romanticize these architectural wonders as testaments to human achievement, it's important to remember the human cost embedded in each brick and stone. The grandeur of the Neo-Assyrian architecture stood on the shoulders of countless laborers who toiled under the sun, their sweat and toil immortalized in structures that have outlasted empires. So, the next time we marvel at an arch or admire an aqueduct, let's not just tip our hats to Roman ingenuity, but also give a nod to the Neo-Assyrians. They were the unsung pioneers who laid the groundwork for what would become some of the most iconic architectural feats in history. Their legacy is a reminder that great civilizations are built not just on visions of grandeur, but also on the backs of those who made those visions a reality. As we continue our exploration of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, we'll uncover even more of the stories behind the stones, the myths within the mortar, and the truths beneath the towers. Stay tuned, because history, much like those ancient arches, always comes full circle. As we step deeper into the intricate web of Neo-Assyrian architecture, it's time to pull back the curtain and reveal how these majestic structures were more than just brick-and-mortar masterpieces. They were the ancient world's version of a political campaign, with a dash of intimidation for good measure. Picture this. You're an Assyrian king, and your empire stretches farther than your wildest dreams. You've got more land than you can shake a scepter at, but maintaining control isn't just about waving your sword around. No, you've got to flex your power in a way that sends shivers down the spines of your vassals and rivals alike. Enter the architectural propaganda machine. These colossal buildings were not merely homes or temples. They were statements of intent, crafted to awe and subdue. Take Ashurnasirpal II Palace at Nimrud, for example. Those walls weren't just there to separate rooms, they were canvases. Imagine walking through a corridor flanked by meticulously carved bas-reliefs, each one depicting the king's military victories and divine favor. It was like strolling through a three-dimensional comic strip, with Ashurnasirpal starring as the unstoppable hero. The message was clear. I'm not just a king, I'm your king, and the guards have my back. These reliefs weren't just about artistic flair, they were loaded with symbolism. Lions, bulls, and mythical creatures danced across the stone facades, representing the king's strength and the divine order of Assyria. Every image was a calculated move in the game of imperial chess. When you saw those fearsome depictions, you knew exactly who was in charge and why you'd better toe the line. Inscriptions added another layer to this visual storytelling. These were the ancient world's Twitter feeds, albeit with fewer emojis and more cuneiform. These texts didn't just list the king's deeds, they glorified them, turning every conquest into a saga worthy of Homer. One famous inscription from the Black Obelisk of Shalmaneser III For example, boasts of tribute from over 30 conquered kings, as if to say, look at how many rulers I've got eating out of my hand. It was the original humble brag, set in stone. But here's the kicker. These inscriptions weren't just about boosting the king's ego. They were a form of psychological warfare designed to remind everyone, subjects and enemies alike, that the Assyrian Empire was a force of nature. By carving their victories into architecture, the Assyrians ensured that their version of events would echo through the ages, long after the dust of battle had settled. Now, let's shift gears and talk about the economic engine behind this architectural propaganda. These grand constructions didn't just appear out of thin air. They required resources, both human and material. The sprawling empire was a treasure trove of raw materials, from cedar wood to precious metals, all funneled into the heart of Assyria to adorn its monumental structures. This wasn't just building for necessity, it was building for legacy. But while the empire's coffers might have been overflowing, the economic reality on the ground was a different story. The labor force was primarily composed of prisoners of war and conscripted workers, individuals who had about as much choice in the matter as a turkey at Thanksgiving. These workers toiled under harsh conditions, their sweat and suffering etched into every block of limestone. For all the architectural brilliance, the human cost was steep, a grim reminder that one man's monument is another's misfortune. Yet the propaganda machine rolled on, crafting an image of a benevolent empire, despite the realities of conquest and subjugation. The Assyrians were masters of spin long before the term fake news was ever coined. They portrayed themselves as protectors of order and civilization, conveniently glossing over the brutal tactics that secured their realm. The inscriptions celebrated their achievements, but conveniently omitted the bloodshed that paid for them. This carefully curated image was essential for maintaining the delicate balance of power. By projecting strength and stability, the Assyrian kings could deter rebellion and foster loyalty among their subjects. It was a strategy that kept the empire cohesive, even as it expanded to its breaking point. But as history has shown time and again, the more you try to control the narrative, the more it slips through your fingers. So, while the romantic notion of an enlightened empire casting its shadow over the ancient world is tempting, the reality is far more complex. The Neo-Assyrian buildings were indeed marvels of engineering and artistry, but they were also tools of power, an enduring testament to the lengths rulers will go to maintain control. As we continue to examine the legacy of Neo-Assyrian architecture, let's keep in mind that these structures were more than just stone and mortar. They were the physical embodiment of a propaganda machine that shaped the narrative of an empire. And while the stones remain, it's the stories they tell, both the triumphs and the tragedies, that continue to captivate our imaginations. Stay tuned as we delve further into the Neo-Assyrian world of monumental ambition, where every brick laid was a message, every relief carved a declaration, and every inscription a proclamation of power. The saga continues, and there's much more to uncover. And so, we find ourselves at the brink of the Neo-Assyrian Empire's architectural legacy, a legacy that, much like a well-constructed ziggurat, has withstood the test of time while towering over the landscape of history. The empire may have crumbled like an over-baked cookie, but its influence on subsequent civilizations is as unshakable as the foundations of its grand structures. Let's kick things off with a bit of myth-busting. The Neo-Assyrians weren't just building for the sake of aesthetics or divine favor. These folks were laying down a blueprint for future empires. Take the Persians, for example. When Cyrus the Great and his successors were crafting their own sprawling empire, they borrowed heavily from the Assyrian playbook. The monumental architecture of Persepolis, with its grandiose staircases and imposing columns, owes a nod to the architectural ambition of the Assyrians. They knew that if you want to be taken seriously as a power player, you've got to build like one. And it wasn't just the Persians who looked back to the Assyrians for inspiration. The Romans, those masters of concrete and arches, were also taking cues. While the Romans perfected the arch, the Assyrians had already laid the groundwork, literally and figuratively. The Roman penchant for grandiose public works and monumental architecture can trace its lineage back to the Assyrians' penchant for turning stone into stories. Fast forward to today, and the echoes of Neo-Assyrian architecture can still be heard in the marble halls of modern buildings. Think of the imposing facades of government buildings or the towering skyscrapers that punctuate city skylines. These structures are the descendants of the Assyrian ethos. Build big, build bold, and make sure everyone knows who's boss. It's a testament to the timeless appeal of grandeur, a reminder that humans have always been driven to reach for the skies, even if it sometimes means stepping on a few toes, or in the Assyrians' case, entire populations. But let's not get too starry-eyed. While the legacy of Neo-Assyrian architecture is undeniably impressive, it's crucial to remember the economic and social realities that underpinned these achievements. The empire's architectural feats were as much about consolidating power as they were about artistic expression. Those awe-inspiring ziggurats and palaces were funded by a combination of heavy taxation and the spoils of war. It was an economic strategy that kept the empire afloat, but also stoked the fires of resentment among its subjects. And what about the human element? The labor force behind these architectural wonders was, more often than not, composed of prisoners of war and conscripted workers. Their toil and suffering were the mortar that held these structures together, a sobering reminder that behind every great monument is a story of human sacrifice and ambition. Yet, despite the harsh realities, the allure of Neo-Assyrian architecture continues to captivate our imaginations. Perhaps it's the sheer audacity of their vision, the way they transformed barren landscapes into bustling metropolises. Or maybe it's the stories these buildings tell, stories of power, ambition, and the relentless drive to leave a mark on the world. Whatever the reason, the legacy of Neo-Assyrian architecture is a reminder of the enduring human spirit and our unyielding desire to build and create. As we wrap up our journey through the architectural feats of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, let's pause to reflect on the bigger picture. These weren't just buildings, they were symbols of an empire's might, and a testament to humanity's capacity for creation and destruction. They remind us that while empires rise and fall, the stories etched in stone endure, whispering tales of glory and hubris to those who will listen. So, the next time you find yourself staring up at a towering skyscraper or marveling at the intricate carvings of a historic monument, remember the legacy of the Neo-Assyrians. Their architectural achievements are a testament to the timeless human drive to build and to leave a lasting impression on the world. It's a legacy that transcends time, a story that continues to inspire, even as the sands of history shift and settle around it. In the end, the Neo-Assyrian Empire may have faded into oblivion, but its architectural legacy remains, a reminder that while the world they built is long gone, the echoes of their ambition still reverberate through the ages. And with that, we've come full circle, much like those ancient arches, reminding us that history is not just a tale of the past, but a story that continues to unfold, one brick at a time.